wizards of Hogwarts who registered in Middle-earth. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 26: The Strongest Wand. But no matter how much he complained internally, now that he needed help, he could only ignore the title. He forced a smile and chatted pleasantly with the head of the Brandideer family. Upon learning that Dui had visited the Barrow Downs, battled wights, and obtained loot, Rory Brandideer was deeply shocked and impressed, and his respect for Dui grew even stronger. After a while, Dui finally revealed his purpose, presenting a list of materials and entrusting the Brandideer family with a collection, offering the jewels he had obtained from the wights as payment. Rory Brandideer readily agreed without even glancing at the list. But once he saw the contents clearly, he suspected he had misread them. He blinked, then took another closer look and was stunned. It wasn't that the items on the list were particularly valuable, but rather that the materials were so unusual. Rory looked at the list. Besides the normal herbs like wormwood, lavender, daffodil root, daisy root, and fig peel, there were also all sorts of bizarre things like caterpillars, slugs, leech juice, beetle eyes, mouse spleens and tails, snake skins and fangs. Wizard oil, are you sure you gave me the right list? The things on this list? Rory asked with some difficulty. Is it hard to find? Dui asked doubtfully. I know these things are hard to find, so I don't insist on collecting them all. I'll be satisfied if I can find a few. No, these things are hard to find, but if you need them, Wizard Duel, we will certainly do our best to help you collect them. Rory shook his head and asked hesitantly, but, what are you looking for these things for? Of course, I'm just curious. If it's a secret, please don't tell me. Dui didn't hide it and explained, it's nothing secret. I want to make some potions, and these are the ingredients I need. Potions. Rory was stunned. He looked at the items on the list, still unable to believe that these strange things could be used to make potions. He knew Dui had made a potion called White Fresh Essence and had given some to Joguo. Not long ago, his daughter Dor was accidentally scratched by a branch while dating Joguo in the wild, and Jo had used that potion to treat her. Rory witnessed the magic of the potion firsthand, seeing his scratch healed in the blink of an eye. He was deeply moved and even more determined to arrange a marriage between his daughter and Drago. However, he never imagined that the magical potion would be made from such bizarre materials, which completely shattered his entire understanding. Despite his hesitation, Rory was still willing to help Dui. He was curious about what kind of potion these materials would eventually create. Dui was grateful and remembered the favor, but he declined Rory's offer of free help. He now had a treasure trove of jewelry and was not short of money. After bidding farewell to Rory and leaving the Brandy Hall, Dui went to the blacksmith's shop and commissioned the smith to make a crucible according to his drawings, using highly magical silver. Dui then returned to Drago's house and took out a small piece of tree hearth that Tom had cut off earlier. It was the perfect size for a wand. Dui took out a dagger and carefully carved into the hearth. The heartwood, once as hard as iron, now felt like wax beneath the dagger, effortlessly slicing through it. Although Dui had been prepared, he was still overjoyed, deeply impressed by the craftsmanship of the Donadane. Such daggers were truly divine weapons, and he possessed 4 of them at once. Dui, already a master wand carver, carefully carved the heartwood piece by piece. A week passed in the blink of an eye, and Dui's heartwood wand had taken shape. The hole for the cord didn't require much skill, so he hired a hobbit craftsman to drill it to the right depth with a diamond drill. Once everything was ready, Dui snapped off his first wand without hesitation and extracted the core. He then carefully placed the core into the heartwood wand, using gum he had gathered from the old willow tree a few days earlier as adhesive, and poured it into the small hole, fusing the core and wand together. After further careful polishing, Dui waited for a full moon night. He held the wand in the moonlight, waving it in a specific motion, infusing it with magical energy, chanting the incantation, Nix Inscribere, Spiritus Aleri Resonantia. As he chanted the lengthy incantation, the moonlight seemed to take on substance, gathering into a silver mist that poured endlessly into the wand. The silent wand seemed to come alive, its magical energy pulsing from it like the sound of a beating heart. Dui gripped the wand, tightly connected to his arm as if it were an extension of his own. Unhindered, the magical energy within him gushed forth through the wand. With a bang, countless golden notes erupted from the wand's tip, like dancing musical spirits, playing a joyful melody. The music, emanating from Dui, spread with a wind, echoing throughout Buckstown. Everyone who heard it was filled with joy, their faces lit up with smiles. Dui was also jubilant, both by the magic of the music and by the delight the Heartwood wand had brought him. The Heartwood wand was truly crafted from the heart of the old forest's mightiest and oldest willow tree, combined with the core made from the hair of River Maiden Goldberry and the beard of Tom Bombadil. This combination of two of the strongest wand materials imbued the Heartwood wand with mysterious and powerful powers. It not only perfectly suited Dui, but also greatly enhanced the power of his spells, allowing him to cast spells far more powerful than his own. Using the same magic power and casting the same spell, the Heartwood wand unleashed a power many times greater than his previous Willow wand. Just like the musical magic he had just cast, the previous Willow wand would have only affected a radius of a few dozen meters. But now, using the heart of the tree wand, his spells had an impact on the entire Buckstown. The difference was truly profound. Dui caressed the wand in his hand with delight. With this wand in hand, his power would multiply many times over. He then felt like he had acquired a new and exciting toy, constantly experimenting with various spells, trying to perfect its harmony with him. Once he had become familiar with his new wand, Dui finally turned his attention to gathering ingredients for the potion. Chapter 27 Goodbye Bilbo. With the full support of the Brandybuck family and Dui's jewels and wealth, the entire population of Buckland was mobilized, gathering potion ingredients with remarkable efficiency. Bundles of wormwood, lavender, daffodil roots, and daisy roots were delivered, while basins of leeches, slugs, caterpillars, mousetails, and spleens were placed outside Zuago's door. While Dui rejoiced at the efficiency, he was also extremely busy, as he needed to process all these potion ingredients, some needing to be dried, others kept fresh. Dui was so busy that he even drafted Zhou into the service to help with the preparation. Dui, are you sure these things can really be used to make potions and not poison? Zuago stared at the basin of slimy slugs before him, his face swollen with hesitation, completely lost. Of course, when I'm done with the potion, I'll give you a bottle. I guarantee it'll work immediately, Dui assured, his eyes glancing at the excitement. He didn't want to touch the slug, so he maliciously handed it to Zhugo, who didn't know how to refuse. He was immediately resistant to the thought of drinking it. Well, forget it. I rarely get sick or injured anyway, so I don't need potions. Then, he gritted his teeth and grabbed a slug. He used scissors to cut off its antennae, which were the ingredients for the potion. Dui was having a tough time, too. He was working with a pot of caterpillars, needing to wear sheepskin gloves to avoid being stung. He then used a knife to cut open the caterpillar's stomach, removed the intestines, cleaned them, and laid them on a stone slab to dry. Just preparing the potion ingredients took Dui a full week, even with the help of magic, and he was exhausted. Besides the potion ingredients, Dui also received 4 pots of plants. 2 were white sage, and the other 2 were nightshade, more commonly known as mandrake. The white sage was what Dui intended to use to make white sage essence. As for the poison nightshade, Dui wanted to see if he could cultivate it into the magical equivalent of mandrake. The 2 poison nightshades Dui had found on the outskirts of the old forest were decades old, their roots already resembling miniature figures with full limbs. Dui regularly infused 4 pots of plants with magical energy daily. 2 of the white fresh plants showed noticeable transformation, but the other 2 remained unchanged, still greedily absorbing Dui's magic, even in ever-increasing quantities. Dui wasn't disappointed, the ability to absorb magic was a good sign. His magic power had doubled, so he didn't have to worry about running low. After gathering all the potion ingredients, Dui didn't immediately begin brewing. Instead, he loaded everything into the wagon, packed everything, and formally said goodbye to Drago and Rory Brandybuck. He had to hurry back to Hobbiton. He couldn't remember the exact time of the expedition to Lonely Mountain, but if he wanted to catch the train, he couldn't linger any longer. After bidding farewell to the reluctant Drago, Dewey once again left in his carriage. Hobbiton was as peaceful and tranquil as ever. Bilbo had just finished lunch and sat in a chair in the garden, leisurely smoking his pipe. He gazed into the distance, his eyes empty, and murmured, "I wonder where Dowie is now." Since Dowie's departure, Bilbo's life had returned to normal, but the longer time passed, the more uneasy he felt. He couldn't help but think of Dowie, his travels, and sometimes even wondered if he should have traveled with him. Just as Bilbo finished his pipe and was about to return home to prepare afternoon tea, a carriage approached from the distance. Bilbo stared in confusion until the carriage drew closer. Dewey jumped from the carriage and waved with a bright smile. "Long time no see, my friend. Did you miss me, Dowie?" Bilbo was overjoyed and ran out of the garden, happily hugging Dewey's thighs. "Why are you back? Why don't you welcome me?" Dewey asked with a deliberate smile. Bilbo saw Dee was joking, but said seriously, "Of course not. You're always welcome here." Then he warmly invited Dee inside for afternoon tea. Dee shook his head, gesturing to the packed carriage. "I must unload everything first." "Oh, and I brought you a pack of your favorite long-grain tobacco?" Bilbo's eyes lit up. Besides enjoying good food, his greatest hobby was smoking his pipe, and long-grain was his favorite brand. He eagerly offered to help move the things. Dee declined his offer. "Well, my friend, you don't have to do it yourself. Just provide a place to put the things." With a snap of his fingers, the items on the carriage began to float out, one by one. One large pack of tobacco flew right in front of Bilbo. Bilbo's mouth dropped open at the sight, exclaiming, "I've seen it many times before, but your magic is always so wondrous, Doy." He quickly opened the door to Baggins and cleared a storage room for Doy's belongings. However, when Bilbo took a closer look at what Doy had brought, he couldn't help but be astonished. Aside from the 4 pots of plants and the bundles of daisy roots, wormwood, and daffodil roots, which seemed normal, what were all those leeches, slugs, and caterpillars in the glass jars? And the snake sloughs gave Bilbo, who was afraid of snakes, a shudder. Bilbo swallowed and asked hesitantly, "Doy, what are you going to do with all this stuff? Making potions?" "Potions? With these?" Bilbo looked incredulous. "Of course, you'll find out later." Doy didn't elaborate. After all, his plan for this trip was to make some potions in preparation for the upcoming expedition. After putting away the items, Doy brought out some jewelry for Bilbo to choose from. The jewels Dewey had obtained from the Barrow Wights were incredibly valuable and ancient. However, Dewey despised the fact that they were plundered from the dead, and had no intention of using them himself. He wouldn't mind giving them away, especially since Bilbo had previously helped him so much. Bilbo, seeing the dazzling jewels and knowing the preciousness, hesitated to accept them. But at Dewey's insistence, he finally chose a ruby brooch. As expected of Drago and his cousin, they chose the same item. Later, over afternoon tea, Bilbo eagerly pulled Dewey aside to recount his journey. Dewey learned from Bilbo that his victory over the invading Ents in Buckland had spread throughout the Shire, earning him the nickname Tree Chopper. The story spread so quickly, thanks in part to the Brandybuck family of Buckland. Dewey was speechless, but reluctantly accepted the nickname, which sounded like a woodcutter. What Dewey didn't know was that his name was known not only in the Shire, but also in Bree. The Prancing Pony Inn in Bree was a resting place for many traveling merchants, adventurers, rangers, and even dwarves in Middle-earth. So, it was not surprising that his name would spread throughout Middle-earth along with these people. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28, Making a Potion. After finishing his afternoon tea, Dewey didn't rush to brew a potion, but instead summoned a spellbook. On the cover was the words Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. On his way back to Hobbiton from Buckstown, Dewey didn't take the straight east-west route. Instead, he took a detour north, checking in at Hardside and Longcliff in the Northern Shire. He received a copy of A History of Magic at Longcliff and a copy of Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration at Hardside. A History of Magic was essentially useless to Dewey, aside from passing the time and learning about the history of the wizarding world. But the Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration was different. As a guide to transfiguration for first and second years at Hogwarts, it focused on basic transfiguration techniques, such as transfiguring everyday objects. Even more delightful to Dewey, It included not only transfiguration spells but also useful summoning spells like spring-like water, orchid blooms, and vanishing. Transfiguration, unlike charms, required unwavering faith and magical power to successfully perform. However, transfiguration is a delicate discipline that demands both imagination and magical control, making it even more challenging to perform than spells. The primary level focuses on transfiguring objects, such as transforming an inanimate object into another inanimate one, followed by transforming a living object into an inanimate one. The intermediate level involves transfiguring animals, such as transforming dead things into living things, and vice versa. The advanced level even involves transfiguring the human body, including the pinnacle of transfiguration, the animagus. DUI's current beginner's guide to transfiguration only covers the basics, but it's a timely help for his thirst for knowledge. With the aid of his wand, DUI can easily perform the simplest transfigurations, such as transforming a small matchstick into a needle in one go. However, the larger the object, the more difficult it becomes and the more magical power it consumes. Flado mentioned, DUI cast a spell over the small bed in the guest room, and it rapidly expanded and transformed into a large bed over 2 meters long. The comforter also transformed into comfortable velvet and silk. Dewey nodded in satisfaction. Now he could finally sleep without worrying about his feet sticking out of bed. He turned to Bilbo, whose mouth dropped open, and asked with a smile, "Would you like me to transform your bedclothes?" "Yes." Bilbo, regaining his composure, nodded quickly, his eyes sparkling. This was even more magical than the previous one. A few days after returning to Hobbiton, Dewey, having mastered the basics of transfiguration, began preparing for the task of potion making. Potions was different from other subjects, as Professor Snape had said, "You come here to learn the precise science and rigorous craft of preparing potions. Since there's no foolish waving of wands here, many of you won't believe in magic. I don't expect you to truly appreciate the beauty of a simmering cauldron, emitting white smoke and wafting wafts of fragrant aroma. You won't truly understand the wondrous power of the fluids flowing through our veins, stirring our hearts and minds. I can teach you how to enhance your reputation, brew glory, and even prevent death, but only if you aren't the fools I so often encounter." DUI wasn't sure if he was the fool that Professor Snape described. But he knew that potions were important. If he could master the subject, he would have an extra layer of self-preservation in Middle-earth. After all, potions possessed effects that spells couldn't, such as healing injuries. Many injuries that would be fatal to ordinary people could be instantly revived simply by taking a potion. There were also polyjuice potions, which could transform one into another person and remain undetectable by spells, truth serums, which could cause one to reveal secrets, luck elixir, which could grant good luck, and even the elixir of life. The only problem was that many of the ingredients needed to make these potions were not found in Middle-earth. Therefore, to create these magical potions, one had to find alternatives. This required the expertise of a potions master. However, these were far too early for DUI, who had barely even begun to master potions. Magical pharmacy and potions only covered basic potions, some of which required common ingredients that could be found in Middle-earth. DUI, a beginner, chose the simplest scabies potion for his first real potion-making practice. In the storage room, DUI set up a silver crucible and preheated it under a kerosene lamp. He then placed 6 prepared snake fangs in a mortar and pestle and ground them into a fine powder. After preheating the crucible for a minute, he poured the mixture into the mortar and stirred it, simmering it. With a flick of his wand, the kerosene lamp beneath the crucible ignited to a high flame. After heating for 10 seconds, he reduced the heat to medium and added 4 slugs to the cauldron. Dewey followed the instructions in the book step by step. Only when the liquid in the crucible began to boil and smoke did he extinguish the flame and let the crucible rest for a while. He then added 2 porcupine quills and stirred the crucible 5 times clockwise. As he stirred, his magic flowed evenly and continuously into the crucible, causing the liquid to gradually change color, eventually turning blue, while pink smoke rose. At this point, the scabies potion was complete. It wasn't a complex recipe, but Dewey was delighted to have succeeded on the first try. Using transfiguration, he conjured a crystal bottle and poured the scabies potion into it. "Is it ready?" Bilbo, who had been silent, finally asked. He had always been curious about how Dewey prepared the potion, so with Dewey's permission, he watched from the sidelines. Seeing Dewey create a miraculous blue potion using snake fangs, slugs, and porcupine quills, he was immediately astonished. Of course, Dewey nodded with a smile, then handed him the potion bottle. This is a scabies potion. It's very effective against scabies. You can try it on anyone with scabies. The scabies potion was a special potion for treating scabies, with a single purpose. Dewey was only using it as a practice for his beginner potion-making skills, so he gave it to Bilbo without hesitation. He then began preparing the potion again for the scabies potion. However, this time his purpose was different, so he used a cast iron potion that Bilbo had discarded as a crucible. He followed the instructions in the potion's textbook step by step until he came to add the porcupine quills. Instead of extinguishing the fire, Dewey tossed them directly into the boiling liquid. In an instant, thick sour green smoke emerged from the liquid in the pot, and a sharp hissing sound was heard. The green liquid reacted violently, quickly corroding the bottom of the pot and splashing everywhere. Chapter 29 Shrinking Potion. Armor. Dewey had been prepared. The moment he dropped the porcupine quills, he immediately cast a protective barrier over the caustic pot, enveloping the liquid and preventing it from splattering. Once the liquid had settled, Dewey conjured a glass bottle and floated the highly corrosive liquid into it. Looking at the iron pot again, it was riddled with holes and completely unusable. Even when Dewey used a repair spell, it proved ineffective. Dewey was delighted by the result, not surprised. The potion book specifically warned against adding the porcupine quills before refining the caustic potion, lest the potion dissolve the caustic potion, transforming it into a highly corrosive liquid. But Dewey had a different perspective. While the failed scabies potion was unusable on humans, it possessed a highly corrosive property, far more potent than even sulfuric acid. If used on an enemy, it would be a formidable weapon. Bilbo, who also witnessed this scene, gazed in awe at the green liquid in the bottle, daring not to approach, fearing the possibility of being contaminated by it would be fatal. After making the scabies potion, both the finished and failed versions, Dewey began experimenting with another magical potion, the shrinking potion. The shrinking potion is a magical potion that shrinks creatures or reverts them to a younger state. It typically appears as a bright green, acidic liquid. It can be used against large monsters resistant to spells or to transport livestock, shrunk entire herds of pigs, cattle, and sheep into a single wizard's pocket. Similarly, if a wizard drinks the shrinking potion, their body will shrink rapidly, and the stronger the potency, the smaller the individual. This is often exploited by unscrupulous wizards, who use it to shrink themselves and steal from homes or vaults. The ingredients for the shrinking potion are not too complex, consisting of shrinking figs, daisy roots, caterpillars, wormwood, leeches, mouse spleens, and hemlock essence. Dewey already has all the other ingredients, except for the hemlock essence, which needs to be extracted from hemlock. Dewey first set up a silver crucible, then cut the hemlock into pieces and ground it into powder in a mortar. He then poured the powder into the crucible and boiled it, stirring constantly with his wand and adjusting the heat to ensure the hemlock's essence dissolved fully in the solvent. Left and right, with a wave of his wand, the liquid and powder residue in the crucible automatically separated. The residue was filtered out and discarded, leaving only the liquid to continue boiling. Eventually, the liquid boiled dry, leaving only a layer of grayish-white paste at the bottom of the pot. This was the hemlock essence needed for the shrinking potion and other potions. With the hemlock essence, Dewey began crafting the shrinking potion. The shrinking potion, a second-year potions course, was more complex than the scabies potion, requiring the individual blending of ingredients such as shrinking figs, daisy roots, caterpillars, wormwood, leeches, mouse spleens, and hemlock essence. It also took longer to make, requiring greater concentration and care. Dewey first squeezed the juice from the shrunken figs, retaining the peel and pulp. He then added the juice to a cauldron and simmered it over low heat for 20 minutes. He then added the daisy root and caterpillars and brought the potion to a boil, until the liquid turned a deep green. After the potion was reduced to half its original concentration, he removed the heat and allowed it to cool for 30 minutes. Once the potion had cooled, he added 24 drops of wormwood infusion, one at a time, stirring with his wand in alternating directions. Before adding the final drop, he stirred vigorously, creating a foamy foam until the surface was covered. Dewey then stopped and turned to other matters. The potion needed to rest for 24 hours, and only after all the foam had subsided could he continue. At the same time the next day, Dewey reheated the resting potion and added the leech juice, stirring slowly and carefully. The color of the potion began to lighten. Once the potion had turned a pale green, he added the rat spleen and hemlock essence and simmered it over high heat for 2 hours. 2 hours later, the potion had turned a bright green and took on the consistency of a thick, syrupy liquid. Looking at the potion in the cauldron, Dewey peered in and examined it carefully, comparing it to the description in the book. "This must be successful, right?" he muttered uncertainly. To know the effect, he needed to experiment. Dewey took a drop from the cauldron, dripped it onto a carrot, and then went out with a carrot. Curious, Bilbo followed. Dewey arrived outside Bag End and saw a pony grazing outside. He immediately waved his carrot at it. "Hey, Derpy, look here." Derpy was a pony given to Dewey by the Took family when he was in Tucker Town. Although very obedient, he always seemed a bit silly, which is why Dewey called him Derpy. However, after returning to Hobbiton, Derpy was mostly in Bilbo's care. In contrast to Dewey's irresponsible master, Bilbo was even more devoted, treating him almost like a third member of the family. He even personally built a simple stable for Derpy, the pony. Seeing the carrot in Dewey's hand, Derpy's eyes lit up. He immediately abandoned the fresh grass in his mouth, ran happily over, and bit into the carrot and began to chew. Bilbo had no time to stop him. He looked at Derpy with concern, glaring at Dewey, the unscrupulous master, for testing the potion. Dewey scratched his nose guiltily. There were only 3 of them here. Could he test the potion on him or Bilbo instead of Derpy? Besides, he was confident in his potion, it wouldn't kill Derpy. Meanwhile, his attention remained fixed on Derpy, observing its changes. After Derpy consumed the carrot laced with shrinking potion, within 2 seconds, Derpy's body began to transform. Squeak, squeak, Derpy panicked. Everything around him, including his 2 masters, became enormous. As Dewey and Bilbo watched, Derpy, the pony, shrank visibly faster and smaller, eventually becoming a palm-sized miniature pony, resembling a living figurine. Dewey picked up Derpy and watched the pony's legs fluttering in panic in his hands with a look of wonder on his face. It seems the potion worked well. 1 drop has shrunk it to this size. If I add a few more drops, it should get even smaller. Bilbo stared at Derpy in Dewey's hands, speechless with shock. Although he had witnessed many of Dewey's magic, such a miraculous potion still astounded him. Dewey saw him staring at Derpy, and handed it to him. Bilbo carefully took Derpy and held it in his hands, feeling its weight and warmth, and realized he was not dreaming. He stared blankly, then looked up at Dewey and stammered, "Dewey, will Derpy always be like this?" Dewey shook his head. "Of course not. Once the effects of the drug wear off, it will return to its original state. So you better be careful not to get crushed by the horse after the effects were off." Bilbo quickly put Derpy on the ground. He didn't want to experience the feeling of being crushed by hundreds of pounds of weight. After waiting for about 15 minutes, the effects of the drug wore off, and Derpy quickly expanded and returned to its original size. Chapter 30 Mandrake. Satisfied with the potion's efficacy, Dewey returned indoors and bottled the pot of shrinking potion. The shrinking potion not only reduced the size of large monsters, rendering them less threatening, but also allowed users to shrink their bodies, allowing them to hide. It was a highly practical potion. After successfully creating the shrinking potion, Dewey continued his efforts, experimenting with other potions over the following days. He successfully crafted a forgetfulness potion, a soothing potion, and a hypnotic potion. He also used 2 pots of mature white dandelion to create a white dandelion essence. Dewey never had too little of this magical potion, which was known for its miraculous healing properties. However, while the 2 pots of white dandelion matured prematurely, the other 2 pots of poison ginseng remained largely unchanged. Even though Dewey watered them daily with his magic, they still accepted everything they were given, but showed no signs of transforming into mandrakes. Dewey was somewhat skeptical about whether the poison nightshade could eventually transform into a mandrake, but determined not to give up halfway, he continued to imbue it with magical power daily, hoping to see what would eventually become. Soon, it was early spring in the Shire. Almost a year had passed since Dewey arrived in Middle-earth. One day, Dewey was studying the contents of curses and counter-curses when he was disturbed by a noise outside. Bilbo knocked on Dewey's door and stood hesitantly at the entrance. Dewey turned his gaze from the curse book and glanced towards the door. "Bilbo, what's wrong?" Bilbo hesitated for a moment, then said, "Dewey, I think Bag End is haunted." "Haunted?" Dewey was surprised, trying to read Bilbo's face to see if he was joking. Bilbo's expression grew more certain, and he nodded. Yes, it's haunted. These past few days, while I was gardening, I kept hearing faint cries. It sounded like a baby crying, very eerie and scary. A baby crying, I wondered, but then, as if realizing something, he hurried out of the room and into the front yard. Bilbo followed, curious. I came to the 2 pots of mandrake in the yard and examined them carefully. He hadn't paid much attention to them recently, aside from watering them with his magic daily. Now, after a closer inspection, he found nothing unusual, save for the branches and leaves growing taller. But I didn't give up. He gently parted the soil with his wand, revealing a root system buried beneath. It was a humanoid structure, like an ugly baby with all the necessary limbs and features. Seeing the mandrake's roots resembled a human, I was immediately delighted. His mandrake cultivation had been a success. Mandrake possesses powerful medicinal properties and is a potent restorative agent, capable of restoring those who have been transformed or cursed to their original state. It is also an essential ingredient in many high-level potions. Even within the magical world, it is a rare and precious herb, requiring a specialized magical environment and care to thrive. Having seen the sedge nightshade show no signs of improvement for some time, I had grown somewhat disheartened. Unexpectedly, he received such a surprise. Just as I was rejoicing, the mandrake, having been pulled from the soil, was displeased. It twisted restlessly, opened its mouth, and let out a piercing, shrill cry. I felt as if the back of his head had been struck hard by a hammer. A splitting headache suddenly struck him, and he felt dizzy and threatened to faint. Oh no, he had forgotten the mandrake's cry. Overjoyed, I resisted the urge to faint and quickly cast a spell on the mandrake. Petrify all, the mandrake's cries instantly ceased. Dewey had just breathed a sigh of relief when he heard a thud behind him. Turning, he saw Bilbo's eyes rolled back, unconscious on the ground. Dewey replaced the oil over the mandrake roots and quickly helped the unconscious Bilbo to his feet. Luckily, the mandrakes were still immature, in their infancy, so their cries weren't fatal. At most, they would cause a momentary unconsciousness. Dewey had a high tolerance for the mandrake's cries and didn't faint immediately. But Bilbo, pitiful, was affected. Dewey carried the unconscious Bilbo to his room and waited for him to wake up. 2 hours later, Bilbo finally awoke, clutching his head, a dazed look on his face. Hush, what's wrong with me? Drink the potion first, it'll ease your discomfort, Dewey said, handing him a glass of soothing potion. Bilbo, knowing the magical effects of Dewey's potions, didn't refuse, downing them in one gulp. His expression suddenly frowned and he showed a look of pain. Ugh, what a strange smell, but the effect was also obvious. Bilbo recovered quickly and also remembered his coma. Bilbo's face was suddenly filled with fear and surprise. Doy, what on earth was that? Why do the roots of the nightshade look like humans and make a crying sound that can make people faint? I'm sorry to have caused you so much trouble. That's a magical plant I cultivated, the mandrake, Doy explained apologetically. I originally thought the cultivation had failed, so I didn't pay much attention to it. I didn't expect it to have already metamorphosed in the soil. The crying sounds these days were made by it. The kind-hearted hobbit felt a little embarrassed by Doy's apology and waved his hands quickly. It's not your fault. Besides, I'm fine now. However, Bilbo was still a little frightened by the crying of the mandrake, and asked hurriedly, Doy, will the mandrake make that kind of crying sound? Doy shook his head, smiled and comforted him. Don't worry, the mandrake usually likes to sleep in the soil before it matures. Unless you dig it out of the soil, it won't make a crying sound that can make people faint. As for the noises it's made these past few days, it probably needs a change of soil. Once the soil is changed, it'll calm down again, Dewey speculated, recalling the contents of his herbal medicine textbook. Mandrakes require regular soil changes. After transplanting them, Dewey, aside from regular watering with magical energy, had forgotten to do so. Now that they've successfully transformed, they need fertile soil to thrive. In the magical world, herbalists typically use dragon manure compost to cultivate mandrakes. But here in Middle-earth, while the Lonely Mountain does have a dragon, that's not practical. So Dewey had to resort to animal manure compost. To do so, Dewey endured the stench and cast 2 petrification spells on the 2 mandrakes before repotting them. When he was done, Dewey felt stinking. Adding to his despair, he'd have to do this task many more times. His only consolation was that once the mandrakes were fully mature, He could craft a potent healing potion and the voodoo doll he'd longed for. Just as DUI was waiting for the mandrake to mature, another wizard came to the Shire one day. Chapter 31: A Visit from the Grey Wizard. The wizard, dressed in a grey robe, clutching a full-length cane staff in one hand and a pipe in the other, arrived on foot at Hobbiton. He didn't head straight for his destination, but instead entered the town and stopped at the Green Dragon Inn. Hobbiton taverns weren't very suitable for a wizard of his height, so he had to stoop all the way to the bar. He called out to the innkeeper, "1 ale, please." Then he plopped down on a bench, straightened up, and breathed a sigh of relief. A momentary hush fell in the tavern, and the hobbit stared at him with surprise and curiosity. The tavern owner was a fat old man. When he saw the wizard, he was stunned for a moment, then shouted with surprise, "Gandalf! When did you come to the Shire?" The grey-robed wizard greeted with a smile, "Hello, Mr. Barney Aleburl. I'm traveling and happened to pass by the Shire, so I came here to rest and catch my breath." The tavern owner obviously knew Gandalf and handed him a glass of ale. "This one is on me, Gandalf. You haven't been to Hobbiton for a long time. It seems like more than 10 years ago. Where have you been all these years?" "Oh, thank you. I used to travel around, and in recent years I went to the east," Gandalf said simply, took a sip of wine, and then asked casually, "By the way, is there anything new in the Shire recently? Can you tell me about it?" "New things? That's quite a lot." The innkeeper was very interested when he mentioned this. Gandalf, you don't know that besides you, there is another wizard who came to the Shire recently. But he is much younger than you. He is now living in our village with Bilbo Baggins." Gandalf seemed to be curious. "Oh, young wizard? Can you tell me about him?" The innkeeper seemed to have found the best audience, and immediately spoke incessantly. "The young wizard is called Dwar. He likes to travel like you. He went on a trip before and made a name for himself. It is said that he helped the residents of Buckland resist the invasion of old forest trees, so he also has the title of Tree Feller." Listening to the innkeeper's endless narration, the image of Dwar gradually took shape in Gandalf's mind. A trace of thought flashed in his deep blue eyes, and the smoke he exhaled obscured his expression. Meanwhile, in Bag End, Dwar has been very busy these days. As the mandrakes entered puberty, they became moody and taciturn. They even grew uncomfortable in their pots and once crawled out of the soil, attempting to escape. Fortunately, DUI spotted them in time and petrified them before they nearly strayed out of the yard. Otherwise, if they had escaped and matured in the wild, it would have been truly fatal. To prevent the two mandrakes from escaping again, DUI used transfiguration to create a small glass greenhouse near Bag End. This provided a comfortable growing environment and also served as a barrier against escape. As the mandrakes matured, their noises became more dangerous. To protect himself and Bill, DUI placed multiple layers of glass around the two mandrakes to minimize their noise. Due to the late spring cold, DUI also dressed the two mandrakes in socks and scarves to prevent them from catching a cold. Both socks and scarves were lovingly knitted from wool by the ingenious Bilbo, who spent an entire night crafting them. He cared for the mandrake as if it were his own child. One afternoon, just as Dewey and Bilbo were enjoying their afternoon tea, there was a knock on the door to Bag End. They exchanged a puzzled glance, wondering who might be coming. Bilbo put down his biscuits, quickly ran to the door, and opened it. He saw a tall figure blocking the entrance, his head barely visible. Bilbo stepped back, straining to look upward. Seeing the newcomer, he exclaimed in surprise, "Gandalf! What brings you here?" Dewey, who was sipping his tea, paused at Bilbo's surprised voice, then immediately put down his teacup and leaned over to peer at the door. Standing at the door was the grey-robed wizard Gandalf, leaning on a wicker stick, bending over and greeting Bilbo with a smile. "Hello, Bilbo, I just happened to be passing by the Shire, and I thought I'd stop by your place to rest for a while." "Are you welcome?" "Of course, very welcome," Bilbo said quickly, then stepped aside to invite. "Please come in, Gandalf, you've come at the right time, we're having afternoon tea. Welcome to join us." "Oh, it seems I've come at the right time," Gandalf said happily. Bending down, he entered Bag End and handed Bilbo his hat and cane. He saw Dewey sitting in the living room at a glance, and his eyes met with each other's, and he smiled and said, "It seems that besides me, there are guests here." Dewey stood up, took the initiative to walk towards Gandalf, and introduced himself politely. "Nice to meet you, Gandalf." "Hello, I am Dewey, and I'm pleased to meet you." Gandalf looked up and down at the young wizard with black hair and black eyes in front of him. His gaze lingered on the black wizard robe for a moment, and he showed a look of surprise. "You know Goldberry, the river girl of the old forest?" Dewey noticed Gandalf's gaze, and realized that he saw that the wizard robe on his body had Goldberry's blessing. He smiled and nodded. "Yes, I know Ms. Goldberry and Tom. I was invited to stay at their house for a while before. They're all very friendly and good people." After hearing this, Gandalf paid more attention to Dewey. Although Lady Goldberry and Tom Bombadil didn't participate in the conflicts of Middle-earth, those they invited as guests were generally positive figures. Furthermore, Dewey was wearing a robe woven with black swan feathers and silver threads, bearing a blessing. This was a privilege not afforded to ordinary guests. "Well, come and have afternoon tea together," Bilbo said, inviting the two to sit down. The three of them gathered in front of the fireplace, enjoying tea and sweet biscuits while chatting. "Gandalf, where have you been all these years?" Bilbo asked curiously. Gandalf took a biscuit and tasted it before he said slowly, "Oh, I've been traveling in the east for most of these years. I first lived with the elves for a few years, then went to the northern wilderness, and finally stayed in the Misty Mountains for a while before returning to the plains of Eriader." Hearing Gandalf's words, Bilbo's face showed longing, and he couldn't help asking, "Gandalf, are the elves as beautiful as the legends say?" Gandalf looked at Bilbo, a smile flashed in his eyes, and he said, "The beauty of the elves cannot be simply summarized in one word. You have to witness it yourself to experience it. If you are curious about them, you can go to the elves' territory. They welcome visits from all friendly people." Although Bilbo was longing, he still shook his head. "I'm just an ordinary hobbit. Going out for adventure is not for me. It's too dangerous. Besides, I will miss breakfast, second meal, morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner and supper." "That's terrible." Seeing this, Gandalf did not continue to persuade him. Instead, he looked at Dewey, who did not interrupt, and asked curiously, "Wizard Dewey, I wonder where you came from before? Judging from your hair color and eyes, are you from the Far East?" Dewey shook his head. "No, I haven't been to the East yet. The place I come from is very far away. This is my first time in Middle-earth." Gandalf looked at him deeply when he heard this. His profound wisdom gave him the ability to see through the truth and falsehood. He could see that Dewey was not lying, and he was also confused. Chapter 32 Gandalf's Speculations. In Gandalf's eyes, Dewey, the young wizard who claimed to be from beyond Middle-earth, was shrouded in mystery. When he tried to penetrate the enigmatic young wizard's soul, he was blocked by an incomprehensible force, as if shrouded in mist, preventing him from seeing the essence of his soul. Furthermore, he sensed a familiar divine power from him, a blessing from Iluvatar. This discovery shocked Gandalf. As one of the 5 wizards sent to Middle-earth by the Valar, and the last to arrive, Gandalf was certain that no one else had traveled to Middle-earth at the Valar's will. But looking at this young wizard favored by Iluvatar, he was unsure. Perhaps the All-Father, who resides in the Temple of Eternity, had intervened, sending down his messengers? Feeling Gandalf's piercing eyes, Dewey felt as if he'd been seen through. Goosebumps spread across his body, and Dewey, bewildered, asked, "Gandalf, what's wrong? Is there something wrong with me?" His thoughts were interrupted by Dewey's words, and Gandalf instantly snapped back to his senses. He looked at Dewey with a warm, gentle gaze. Glancing at Bilbo beside him, he asked tentatively in a cryptic tone, "Wizard Dewey, are you on a mission to Middle-earth?" Dewey's pupils shrank, his heart churning. Could it be that he'd discovered a system within him? "Gandalf, I don't understand you." Dewey tried to remain calm and not reveal a single flaw. But to Dewey's surprise, Gandalf gave him an "I understand" look. He didn't press the issue, but instead offered, "Wizard Dewey, if you need anything, you can ask me for help later." "Oh, thank you." Dewey was confused. What did this mean? Could it be that he'd discovered a system within him? Noticing Gandalf's change in attitude, becoming more approachable and proactive, and thinking back to what he had just said, Dewey suddenly had a guess. He looked at Gandalf across from him in disbelief. Could this guy be thinking of him as one of his own? Feeling a little guilty, Dewey didn't want to continue discussing this topic, so he quickly changed the subject and asked, "Gandalf, do you have a mission this time from the east?" Perhaps because he considered Dewey one of his own, Gandalf didn't hide anything. He nodded and said, "I discovered a dark shadow in Dol Guldur in the east and met an imprisoned dwarf king. He asked me to hand over his relics to his son." "An imprisoned dwarf king?" Dewey was surprised. Yes, he is Thrain II, the previous king of the dwarves of Durin. Over 100 years ago, the dragon Smaug descended upon Lonely Mountain and sacked the dwarf kingdom there, forcing the dwarves of Durin to flee. Refusing to abandon the Lonely Mountain, Thrain II was captured by orcs near Mirkwood while on his way to explore the Lonely Mountain. He was imprisoned in the fortress of Dol Guldur and tortured. By the time I visited him in Dol Guldur, he was already near death. Gandalf's expression grew solemn as he spoke. Hearing this, Dui recalled that this Thrain II, imprisoned by the orcs, was likely Thorin Oakenshield's father. Therefore, Gandalf's mission to deliver Thrain II's relics to Thorin Oakenshield, thus initiating the dwarf expedition to the Lonely Mountain, suggests that the time for the expedition to the Lonely Mountain is not far off. He couldn't help but glance at Bilbo, who was listening intently, never realizing he would soon be the central figure. Furthermore, Gandalf's particular visit to Bilbo's home clearly indicated Bilbo's intentions. Given Gandalf's cunning and calculating nature, the poor hobbit was clearly incapable of escaping his schemes. Dewey, though sympathetic, would not stand in his way. After all, this expedition was an opportunity for Bilbo, a chance to find the One Ring. Now in Gollum's hands and hidden within the Misty Mountains, the One Ring lay hidden. Without Bilbo, the Chosen One, even Dewey, the prophet, would have had no hope of finding it. After tea, Bilbo and Gandalf shared a glass of long-grain tobacco. The two smoked so much that Dewey retreated, choking. Seeing this, Gandalf burst into laughter and urged Dewey to try the tobacco. Dewey declined the offer and prepared to go to the glass house to inspect his two mandrakes. Having heard of the wonders of mandrakes from Bilbo, Gandalf, curious as ever, followed to see them. Upon arriving at the glass house, Gandalf, observing the transparent glass, immediately recognized the transformation. He exclaimed, "What a marvelous magic of transfiguration! It can change the form of matter, transforming one thing into another." This is a very rare ability. Gandalf admitted he lacked such power. While he could use sleight of hand to transform things, he couldn't transform matter the way Dewey could. He also saw the immense potential of this transfiguration magic. With sufficient magical power, everything in the world could be transformed, even to the highest depths, perhaps even the very essence of matter itself. It would be possible to transmute stone into gold and create things from nothingness. This thought further solidified Gandalf's earlier speculation. After all, not even the Valar possessed such authority and power. Who else but Iluvatar, the Lord of all, could bestow such power? Upon entering the greenhouse, Dewey carefully checked the condition of the two mandrakes, fearing any sudden noise. The cries of the nearly mature mandrakes were already dangerous, so Dewey immediately cast two petrification spells upon them after removing the glass covers. If Dewey hadn't learned the mute charm or the silencing charm, he wouldn't have had to go through so much trouble. Gandalf marveled at the humanoid mandrake root Dewey had pulled out of the pot. Its limbs were complete, its features vivid and lifelike. With Dewey's permission, he picked up a mandrake and examined it carefully. "I sense a rich magical energy and vitality from it. If I hadn't known you nurtured it, I would have thought it was a variant of the treeman," Gandalf exclaimed in admiration, enthusiastically imitating Dewey as he dressed the mandrake in baby clothes and then re-spoiled it. "I think Daragast will have something in common with you. He's another wizard who lives in the forest and loves to care for plants and animals. I'll introduce you to him someday, Daragast the Brown." Dewey knew him. A wizard who loved the forest and nature. Unlike Gandalf, who traveled extensively to organize the fight against darkness, Daragast preferred to live among the birds and beasts. His unconventional ways ultimately prevented him from receiving the Valar's permission to return to Valinor after the War of the Ring. However, this wasn't too difficult for the brown wizard to accept. Compared to returning to Valinor, he might have preferred staying in Middle-earth, surrounded by the flowers, birds, insects, and fish. Chapter 33 Wands and Staffs. After finishing the mandrake, the two returned to Bag End. Bilbo was already preparing dinner for the three of them. Gandalf had long noticed the wand in Dewey's hand that was used to cast spells. Naturally, Gandalf was interested in such a small and unique wand. He asked to see it. Dewey did not refuse, and he was also interested in Gandalf's wand. Gandalf readily agreed and casually threw the wand to Dewey, then took Dewey's wand and looked at it carefully. What a clever combination, using magical wood as the wand body. Is this the heart of the old willow tree in the old forest? Gandalf looked at Dewey. Dewey nodded and explained, "The old willow tree invaded Bucktown. I confronted it head-on and finally defeated it by cutting it in half. Tom took the lower half back to the old forest and replanted it, and I took out the heart of the upper half to make this wand. Gandalf smiled and agreed, that old willow tree does have a bad temper. When I went to the old forest to see Tom, it attacked me, and it took a lot of effort to get rid of it. It's bad luck for it to meet you now. Then he continued to observe the wand in his hand. His eyes seemed to be able to see through the wand and see inside. The core of the wand is a hair? No, there are two. And I feel the breath of the river and the earth. Do they come from Ms. Goldberry and Tom? Gandalf looked at Dui in surprise. Dui was equally amazed by Gandalf's insight. He nodded and replied, it's a hair from Lady Goldberry and a beard from Tom. It seems Lady Goldberry and Tom both have high hopes for you, Gandalf exclaimed, his opinion of Dui rising even higher. They are indeed very good people, Dui said sincerely. Besides Bilbo, they were the couple Dui admired most. Then Gandalf took Dui's wand and waved it excitedly. To Dui's surprise, the wand actually responded in Gandalf's hand, continuously shooting out colorful magical fireworks. Wow, Bilbo and Dui stared at the dazzling fireworks with wide eyes, filled with amazement. Gandalf, like an old boy discovering a fascinating toy, unleashed lightning, gusts of wind, and flames from his wand. Then, reluctantly, he set it down and gazed at Dewey with star-like blue eyes. Dewey, your wand is truly a brilliant idea. It uses only a simple combination of magical wood and hair to cast spells. While the wand doesn't significantly increase magical power, it's incredibly universal and balanced. Anyone with magical potential can use it to cast spells. I believe Allah, the god of craftsmanship, will appreciate you. Gandalf, convinced that this wand-making technique was Dewey's creation and unique, furthered his admiration for his wisdom. Thank you for the compliment. Dewey felt a little guilty. He knew the wand-making technique came from another world, and he felt a little unworthy of Gandalf's praise. Gandalf assumed he was embarrassed and continued, believe me, Doyle, your wisdom and creativity deserve such praise. Your wand is truly universal. You will be a favorite of many magical races, and they will flock to you just to get a wand you craft. Doyle was puzzled. Gandalf, isn't that too much of a compliment? Can't your wand also cast spells? Gandalf pointed to the wand he was handing Doyle. Try it. Doubtfully, Doyle grasped the wand, taller than he was. Made of an unknown vine wood, it had a spiral shape and a flowering appearance. Its surface was extremely rough, as if it had never been polished. A fist-sized blue gem was embedded in the flower at the top of the wand, emitting a faint blue glow. Doyle tried to infuse it with magic power, using it as a wand, chanting the incantation, Loomis. Suddenly, the magic power within Doyle surged uncontrollably. Like a ravenous glutton, the wand devoured his magic. A vast amount of magical energy poured into the gem atop the staff, instantly emitting a dazzling light, a radiance comparable to the sun and moon. It instantly transformed Baggins into a blanket of white, blinding everyone in the blinding brilliance. Dui felt like he was going blind and quickly released the staff, halting the flow of magical energy. Dui, you nearly blinded an old man like me. You know, my old bones are only capable of functioning, my eyes are all but decayed. Gandalf lowered his hand, wiped away his natural tears, and complained with a smile. Dui ignored Gandalf's joke. The old man could gallop for days and nights and slash with a sword. To say he was immobile was a joke. Still, he looked at Bilbo with concern. Bilbo, how are you? Are you alright? The poor hobbit had been the slowest to react, his eyes blinded by the bright light before he could close them. Now, tears were streaming, and his vision hadn't yet recovered. I'm fine. I'll be fine in a moment, Bilbo said, blinking dazedly. After confirming that he was alright, Dui returned his attention to the staff. Gandalf asked with a smile, how do you feel? Have you found anything? Dui nodded with a lingering fear. Although the staff is powerful, it consumes a lot of magic power, and I've noticed that when I use it, I need to use my mind to control it. He looked at Gandalf in confusion. Gandalf nodded approvingly. Indeed, wielding a staff requires not only powerful magical energy but also strong mental power to guide and control it. Therefore, those who can wield it are very demanding. More importantly, the crafting of a staff is also very demanding. Gandalf pointed to the sapphire and laid at the top of the staff. The core of the staff is that magical gem, but magical gems are extremely rare. I obtained it from an elf friend, which enabled me to craft my own staff. Staffs aren't as universal as yours. That's why I say yours is a genius creation. You enable those with less powerful magic to cast spells." Hearing Gandalf's words, Dui was also suddenly enlightened. He hadn't expected his wand-making skills to be so valuable in Gandalf's eyes. However, Dui was also very attracted to the staff. Although using a staff consumed a lot of magical energy and mental power, the power it unleashed was unmatched by a wand. More importantly, the staff could influence and mobilize the magical elements in the surrounding environment, producing a wide range of magical effects. It can be said that the magic wand and the staff are two different directions. The staff is broad and large, pursuing the powerful power of magic, while the wand is fine and delicate, pursuing the ultimate transformation of magic. Dui is an adult and wants both. Chapter 34 Invitation. Just as Dui was fascinated by the staff, Gandalf made the first move. "Dui, please agree to my request and make me a wand." Dui was somewhat surprised and asked, "Gandalf, you already have a staff, why do you need a wand? A wizard always has to have a backup plan, right?" Gandalf winked at Dui mischievously. "If my staff ever becomes unavailable, having a wand is always a safety precaution. Of course, in exchange, I'll make you a staff of your own." "How about that? That's great." Dui thought to himself. Dui agreed without hesitation. After all, he was getting the better deal. While a wand was simpler to make, a staff required a very precious magical gem as its core. Gandalf had prepared Dewey for this, saying, "Magic gems are hard to find. They're mostly collected by ancient elves or dwarven royalty. So I'm afraid I won't be able to make you a staff anytime soon. I hope you understand." Dewey, of course, had no objection. "I know staffs are difficult to make, and I'm not in a rush to own one just yet. So, Gandalf, please don't worry too much about me. Just let things take their course." Later, Gandalf recounted his travels to Middle-earth, the sights and culture of beautiful Rivendell, the mysterious golden forest of Lorien, the deep Mirkwood, the dangerous misty mountains, and the elves, dwarves, and humans. Bilbo and Dewey were captivated by Gandalf's vivid descriptions, as if they were witnessing the sights themselves. Unlike Bilbo, however, Dewey was preoccupied with what he could gain by checking in at these places. Seeing Bilbo and Dewey's eager expressions, Gandalf's eyes flickered with a smile, and he extended his invitation. "Dewey, Bilbo, I've come back this time not only to deliver the relics of King Thrain II to his son, but also to organize a team to the Lonely Mountain to investigate the dragon smog. I'd like to invite you to join us on this adventure." "Adventure? No, I won't." Bilbo instantly retreated, shaking his head in defiance. "Adventure isn't for a hobbit like me. Gandalf, find someone else. I just want to stay in Bag End and enjoy a peaceful life every day." Gandalf didn't give up, and continued to persuade him. "Bilbo, put aside your resistance and think about what you really want. Aren't you curious about the outside world? Whenever you read those adventure books, don't you ever think about experiencing it yourself? Don't forget that you have the adventurous blood of the Took family running through your veins. Your ancestors had legendary adventures. Don't you want to inherit their spirit?" Bilbo was moved by these words. He felt his blood boiling, and a surge of adventurous courage welled up in his heart. Dewey, standing beside him, seemed to have sensed something as well, and his eyes casually glanced at Gandalf's hand. Although he couldn't see anything, he guessed that Gandalf had just tapped into the power of the fire ring, Neraya. From his limited knowledge, this elven ring not only controlled the element of fire but also had the power to inspire courage, making it an extremely precious and powerful artifact. To rule Middle-earth, the Dark Lord Sauron, in the guise of Anadar, the Lord of Gifts, deceived the elves with his beautiful appearance and masterful forging techniques. He then instructed them to forge the rings of power, 7 for dwarves and 9 for men, secretly infusing them with dark, corrupting powers. He then secretly forged the One Ring himself within Mount Doom to control the other rings. Unbeknownst to him, the elf craftsman Celebrimbor, applying Sauron's knowledge, forged the 3 rings, Neraya, the Water Ring, Via, the Air Ring, and Neraya, the Fire Ring. These eventually fell into the hands of Galadriel, Lady of Lorraine in the Golden Forest, Elrond, Lord of Rivendell in Rivendell, and Gandalf. Because the 3 rings were forged without Sauron's hand, they were untainted by his dark power. However, because the rings were crafted with the skill of the Dark Lord Sauron and inherently controlled by the One Ring, unaware of Sauron's influence over them, the owners of the 3 rings refrained from using their power to avoid attracting his attention. Even so, The 3 rings are truly artifacts. Galadriel, wielder of the Ring of Water, used its power to erect a magical barrier around the golden forest of Lorien, ensuring year-round spring and protecting Lorien from the forces of darkness. Elrond, wielder of the Ring of Air, used its power to forge Rivendell, the last refuge of the elves, and became Middle-earth's greatest healer. Gandalf, needless to say, used the Ring of Fire, Naya, to inspire the people of Middle-earth to fight against darkness and guide and defeat Sauron and his minions. If it weren't for the fact that these rings all had powerful owners, Dewey would have been tempted. Given the opportunity, he would have loved to see the 3 rings. After all, the Ring of Fire, Naya, truly inspires courage. But when Bilbo, who had held the One Ring for decades without being corrupted, encountered it, the ring's power was greatly diminished. Bilbo's desire for peace ultimately overcame the courage that had been stirred within him. He shook his head and said, "Those adventures were taken by my great-great-great-great-uncle, a long time ago. I'm just an ordinary Baggins now, living a peaceful life, and I have no interest in adventure." Gandalf was a little surprised to see that Bilbo was unaffected by the ring's power. Seeing Bilbo's resistance, he gave up trying to persuade him and turned to Dewey. "What do you think, Dewey? Are you willing to join the adventure team?" Dewey did not expect to be invited so easily. Although he was happy, he did not agree immediately. Instead, he asked, "Gandalf, you invited me to join the team. What do you want me to do?" Gandalf saw that Dewey was interested, and immediately explained seriously, "This expedition will pass through many dangerous areas. I would like to ask you to protect the team and ensure its safe arrival at Lonely Mountain while I am away, when you are not there." "Gandalf, aren't you going to follow the team?" Dewey looked at Gandalf in surprise. Gandalf shook his head, his expression became a little solemn. "I stayed in the Misty Mountains for a few months when I came back this time, and I found that the number of orcs there suddenly increased dramatically, and they were in good order. It was obvious that a new king was born. And there were rumors that necromancers were frequently active in Dol Guldur. I suspect that a powerful evil force is secretly growing and dominating all this. In order to prevent the orcs and the dragons of Lonely Mountain from joining forces and posing a greater threat, I plan to organize an expedition to Lonely Mountain to inquire about the dragons' whereabouts. After organizing the team this time, I may need to go to the Misty Mountains and Dol Guldur to investigate the situation. I will need you to protect the team then." Hearing Gandalf's words, Dewey's expression became serious. "Okay, I'm willing to join the team." Gandalf smiled when he heard this. "Welcome to join the Lonely Mountain expedition. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Thorin Oakenshield. On the road west of the Shire, Dewey and Gandalf were sitting in a carriage pulled by the pony Derpy, leisurely traveling west. They were bound for the Blue Mountains. After the dragon Smaug conquered the Lonely Mountain, Thorin Oakenshield led the dwarf refugees from the Lonely Mountain to settle in the Blue Mountains. Gandalf needed to deliver the relics entrusted to him by King Thrain II to Thorin Oakenshield, who lived in the Blue Mountains. Dewey, on the other hand, had come with Gandalf, ostensibly to meet the heir of Durin's dwarf clan, but in reality, to check in at the Blue Mountains. "Gandalf, there are only 2 of us on the expedition now. Are you sure you can convince Thorin Oakenshield to go to the Lonely Mountain?" Dewey asked Gandalf, while he petrified 2 pots of mandrakes that were shaking uncomfortably and trying to break out of the soil to prevent them from causing trouble. Gandalf puffed on his pipe and smiled confidently. "I'm quite confident in my eloquence. Besides, the Lonely Mountain is the homeland of Durin's dwarves. Occupied by the dragon for so many years, I believe they'll be willing to reclaim their home." He then looked at the 2 mandrakes petrified by Dewey and shook his head with a hint of sympathy. "Poor creatures, why did you bring them here? Wouldn't it be better to leave them in the greenhouse and let Bilbo take care of them?" Dewey looked at him speechlessly. "I dare not leave the mandrakes in Bilbo's care, or I'll find his corpse when I return." The mandrakes were about to mature, and the sound they would make could be fatal. Even he had to be cautious, let alone handing them over to Bilbo. The Blue Mountains, where Thorin Oakenshield lay, were located not far west of the Shire. Gandalf and Dewey traveled for a week before reaching their foothills. After the dragon Smaug took over the Lonely Mountain, the dwarves of Durin were forced to flee, wandering from place to place before finally settling in the Blue Mountains. The Blue Mountains once hosted the dwarven city-states of Belegost and Nogrod. These cities gradually declined and fell into ruin, leaving behind numerous mines and tunnels deep within the mountains. The exiled dwarves of Durin lived within these tunnels, forming a small town in front of the caverns. Dui accompanied Gandalf to the dwarven settlement of Durin. This was his first encounter with dwarves, and he was filled with wonder. The dwarves were only slightly taller than hobbits, reaching only to Dui's waist. However, unlike hobbits, the dwarves were rugged, broad-shouldered, and heavily bearded. Even the female dwarves had beards. Dui marveled at the sight. Were it not for their clothing, he wouldn't have been able to tell the dwarves' genders. The dwarves, curious about Dui and Gandalf, the two tall strangers, looked at them with curiosity. Gandalf, oblivious to the gazes, greeted the surrounding dwarves with a friendly hello. "We're looking for Thorin Oakenshield. Can you tell me where he is?" Gandalf asked a dwarf. The dwarf gave Gandalf and Dewey a curious look and pointed behind them. "He's in the smithy at the back. Look for him there." After thanking the dwarf, Gandalf led Dewey to the smithy. Inside, the furnace was blazing, its scorching heat radiating from the interior. A dwarf, clad in leather and bare-armed, was hammering away at a piece of red-hot iron, sending sparks flying. He had long black hair and a long beard, and was short but exceptionally muscular. The heavy hammer seemed like a feather in his hand, effortlessly hammering the iron into shape. Gandalf raised his hand and greeted them. "Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain, grandson of Thor. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Gandalf the Grey." He then pointed to Dewey. "This is my companion, Derwiel the Black." Thorin pretended not to hear and continued working on his ironwork. Gandalf didn't mind, instead surveying the shop. He pulled a heavy sword from a shelf, examined it carefully, and commented, "The weaponry of the dwarves is truly exquisite, rivaling even the elves." Thorin, who was working on the ironwork, snorted coldly at the mention of the elves. His tone was filled with disdain and contempt. He raised his head, looking at Gandalf and Dewey with a cold, suspicious look. "What do you want with me?" Gandalf got straight to the point. "Thorin Oakenshield, as the heir to the throne of Durin's dwarves, are you willing to shoulder the responsibility of reclaiming our lost homeland and reclaiming the Lonely Mountain?" Thorin wasn't moved by these words. He gave Gandalf a cold look and sneered. "Don't you know that the Lonely Mountain has been taken over by a dragon? The dwarves of Durin are now divided. Do you think we have the strength to fight the dragon?" Gandalf shook his head. "From what I understand, the dragon has been dormant for a long time. You don't need to fight it directly. You only need to steal the Arkenstone, the dwarf's greatest treasure. As the heir to Durin's clan, you can use the Arkenstone to rally the other dwarves, reorganize your army, and drive the dragon out of the Lonely Mountain." Thorin's eyes gleamed, clearly motivated. But he still looked at Gandalf and Dewey with suspicion. "You're so eager to help us? What are your conditions?" "I don't need anything. My goal is the dragon," Gandalf explained. "I've noticed unusual movements among the orcs lately. They're moving in an orderly fashion, which must indicate the emergence of a new leader. To prevent the orcs from joining forces with the dragons, I need to enlist the help of the dwarves to eliminate the dragon threat first." "What about him?" Thorin turned his questioning gaze directly at Dewey, who had remained silent. Dewey frowned at Thorin's suspicion. "Don't worry about me. I've only come at Gandalf's invitation. I'm not interested in your affairs and won't interfere." Gandalf, sensing Dewey's displeasure, looked at Thorin sternly. "Dewey is a powerful wizard. He helped the hobbits defeat the Huorn of the Old Forest and even penetrated deep into the Barrow Gornlick to defeat the Whites without a fight. His fame is legendary throughout the wilds of Eriador, and his magic is far beyond my reach. If you hope to reach the Lonely Mountain safely, or even to defeat the dragons, Dewey is your guarantee." Hearing Gandalf's serious words, Thorin's gaze towards Dewey grew serious. Gandalf was no unknown figure among the dwarves, elves, and humans. Although he was often portrayed as a wise man, frequently traveling across the land to organize various forces to fight against darkness, no one doubted his power. Naturally, no one disbelieved what he said. Chapter 36 Ancient Magic Runes. Dui felt a little embarrassed by Gandalf's praise. Gandalf was a man of appearances. He knew his own strengths and weaknesses, but he would not really think that his magic was better than Gandalf's. "By the way, this is the key and map to the gate of the Lonely Mountain that your father left for you before he died." Gandalf took out a golden key and a map and handed them to Thorin. Have you seen my father? Thorin became emotional, staring at Gandalf intently. After the dragon smog occupied the Lonely Mountain, Durin's dwarfs wandered around and finally settled in the Blue Mountains. But Thorin's father, Thorn, was unwilling to give up his home in the Lonely Mountain, so he led a team of people to the Lonely Mountain to explore, but they disappeared. Gandalf sighed. In search of the dark, I once secretly infiltrated Orguldur, where I met Thorin, imprisoned for years. He was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and his days were numbered. Before dying, he gave me the key and map to the Lonely Mountain, asking me to pass them on to you. Seeing Thorin lost in grief, Gandalf offered no more entreaties and stood up to leave. If you have made a final decision, I will meet you at the Prancing Pony Inn in a month. Thorin lowered his head, looking at the key and map in his hands, without answering. On their way out, Dewey asked Gandalf in confusion. How can you be sure he will come? Gandalf smiled confidently. He will. I see in his eyes the ambition to reclaim the Lonely Mountain. Well, Dewey, we part here, Gandalf said, pausing to explain. Before this, I need to go somewhere else to gather some information, so I can't go with you. Dewey nodded, without asking where he was going. After watching Gandalf leave, Dewey silently chanted, "System, sign me in." The system had already responded the moment he touched Thorin's oaken shield, but he'd been waiting until now because someone was there. Signed into the Blue Mountains, Dwarf Town. Congratulations on receiving the Dictionary of Runes. Dewey was stunned by the title, then flipped open the book and read for a moment before realizing it. Ancient runes, also known as runes, are ancient and magical symbols. Each symbol corresponds to a specific magical power or concept, and when combined, they produce different effects. When crafting alchemical items, runes are engraved on them to create enchantments, enhancing their magical power and efficacy. Therefore, ancient runes can be said to be a prerequisite for learning alchemy. Hogwarts only offers an elective course in ancient runes in the 3rd year, and alchemy in the 6th and 7th years. Alchemy, unlike other magic, has limitations, like spells and transfiguration. Once the spell is interrupted or the spell is dispelled, the enchanted item returns to its original state. However, alchemy's effects are like solidifying magic. Even after the spell is removed, the alchemical products retain their magical properties. Within the wizarding world, everything from the memory ball, the golden snitch, the shorthand quill, wizard's chess, and the looking glass to the night bus, the Hogwarts Express, the mirror of Eris, the pensieve, the time turner, and even the philosopher's stone are products of alchemy. It can be said that alchemy permeates every aspect of the magical world. Dewey naturally yearns for alchemy, especially the philosopher's stone, considered alchemy's pinnacle of achievement. It can be said that it can transform everything into gold and grant immortality. As a wizard, Dewey's lifespan is longer than that of ordinary humans. But in Middle-earth, he might not survive even the Dunedain, let alone the Eternal Elves. If he wanted to live longer, the Philosopher's Stone offered a way. However, this was too far away for Dewey at the moment. He simply wanted to study alchemy and deepen his magical skills. Therefore, learning and mastering the ancient runes became his mission for the next few months. The Dictionary of Runes is a very thick ancient runic dictionary, recording the meanings and explanations of runic symbols. Its content is very boring and requires great patience and careful study. After completing the check-in, Dewey did not leave the dwarf town immediately, but instead wandered around the town. The dwarves are experts in mining and forging ores. They dig tunnels, extract various ores from the mountains, smelt them, and then forge them into a variety of exquisite weapons, armor, and crafts. As Dewey walked along, he discovered that some of the weapons and armor sold in the town were not made for dwarves, but were instead designed to suit human height and build. Seeing Dewey arrive, the dwarf owner of the shop approached enthusiastically, asking, "What weapons do you need? We can forge them for you, and we guarantee the quality." Dewey pointed to a piece of silver armor before him and asked, puzzled, "Why are you selling human armor here? Are humans buying them?" Upon hearing this, the dwarf owner puffed out his belly and said proudly, "Our dwarven forging skills are unmatched. Many humans dream of owning a weapon we forge. We have a dedicated sales channel with them, and these weapons are custom-made for them." Dewey understood. He hadn't expected the dwarves to be not only skilled in forging, but also in business. No wonder they had amassed a vast wealth of the Lonely Mountain, attracting the coveted attention of the dragon Smog, who sought to claim it for himself. Dewey picked up a dwarven forged longsword and examined it closely. It was just an ordinary weapon forged for humans, but its sharpness and strength were undoubtedly far superior to those forged by humans. He put down his sword, and then asked the dwarf boss, "Boss, I have an ancient sword here that needs to be repaired. I wonder if you have any way to restore it to its former sharpness?" Of course, price is not a problem. The dwarf boss's eyes lit up when he heard the last sentence, but he did not give a guarantee immediately. Instead, he said, "If the customer wants to repair the ancient sword, we must first see the extent of the damage to the ancient sword to determine whether it can be repaired." Then his eyes searched Dui and asked in confusion, "Customer, where's your sword?" Dui waved his hand, and a big sword flew out of the carriage on the street behind him and floated in front of the dwarf boss. "This is the ancient sword. Can you help me repair it?" The dwarf boss was startled. Seeing the great sword floating before him, he hesitated to take it. His original intention of slaughtering him vanished in an instant, and his attitude towards Dui became respectful and cautious. "So you are Master Wizard. I apologize for not recognizing you earlier." Dui ignored his change of attitude and said, "Take a look at this ancient sword. Can it be repaired?" The dwarf boss returned his gaze to the rusted greatsword before him, carefully took it, and examined it carefully. The blade is cast from bronze. It's a durable material, cast with superb craftsmanship, and large in size. "Is this the forging technique of the Numenoreans?" The dwarf boss looked up with a look of surprise. A flash of admiration flashed across Dui's eyes, and he nodded. This sword was previously eroded by the dark power of the whites. After being purified, it lost its former sharpness and power. "Do you think there is any way to restore it?" The dwarf boss looked troubled and shook his head. "It would be easy to simply repair the appearance, but if you want to restore its former strength and sharpness, you have to put it back into the furnace for forging, then forge it in the furnace again," Dui said directly. "Listen to me, Master Wizard. The sword body of the Numenorean people is very heat resistant. I'm afraid the temperature of my furnace here can't refine it. We need a large furnace. We only have one large furnace here. If you want to use it, you must get the owner's consent." "Who is the owner?" "It's our king, Thorin Oakenshield." Chapter 37 The Deal with Thorin. In Thorin's hall, Dewey once again encountered Thorin Oakenshield, barely half a day apart. "It's you, Black Wizard." Thorin's sharp eyes flickered with surprise at Dewey's reappearance, and he frowned slightly. "So you are the client who commissioned Bondi to reforge the ancient sword." Dewey didn't have much of a favorable impression of Thorin, but now, seeking his help in forging the white sword, he had no choice but to come in person. "Greetings again, Thorin Oakenshield, grandson of Thor, son of Thrain, king under the mountain." Dewey nodded, mimicking Gandalf's words. "I once wrested the ancient sword from the whites of the Barrow Downs, but time and the forces of evil have eroded it, and it has lost its former sharpness and toughness. I've heard that the dwarves are unrivaled in forging, so I'd like to ask for your help in reforging it." The Barrow Downs were feared even by the dwarves, and the Barrow Downs were even more terrifying. Thorin had heard Gandalf tell of Duir's solo expedition to the Barrow Downs, but he hadn't expected Duir to actually seize the ancient sword from the white. This gave him a clear understanding of Duir's strength for the first time. Even Thorin, despite his arrogance, would treat such a figure with caution. So he stepped down from his seat and said to Duir, "Forging is as easy as eating and drinking for us. We'll take your business, but before that, could you please show me the ancient sword?" Duir handed him the white sword he had brought with him. Thorin took the sword. The heavy sword, longer than he was, felt weightless in his hand, grasping it with a single hand. He examined the sword carefully, his face fading from the solemnity of a king, revealing for the first time the meticulousness and professionalism of a craftsman. The sword is intricately crafted, with a diamond-shaped blade, suitable for stabbing and slashing. The hilt is designed for one-handed use, with a bronze crescent guard and the symbol of the white tree. "This is a sword belonging to the royal family of the descendants of the Nominor people," Thorin said, looking at Duir with assurance. Dewey nodded and explained, "It once belonged to the last prince of Cardolan." Thorin suddenly realized that dwarven history recorded Cardolan as a splinter kingdom from Arnor. He also knew that this kingdom, founded by descendants of the Numenoreans, was ultimately destroyed by the Witch King of Angmar. The Numenoreans, taught by the Noldor, the forge masters of the elves, had mastered the art of forging. Even the dwarves, naturally gifted at forging, could not underestimate the Numenorean craftsmanship. Thorin held the ancient sword, pondered for a moment, then said to Dewey with a blazing gaze, "I will forge this sword myself, and I will also seek the assistance of the best craftsmen of my clan. Not only will it be restored to its former sharpness, but it will even become even more powerful." Thorin's words left Dewey's face devoid of joy. Instead, he stared at him sternly and asked directly, "What are your terms?" He didn't believe Thorin would be so kind as to mobilize his entire clan to help him reforge the sword. "I want to invite you to join the expedition to Lonely Mountain and help us fight the dragon there," Thorin stated his purpose. Dewey frowned and looked at the dwarf prince in confusion. "Have you forgotten that I promised Gandalf that I would join your expedition? Why would he use this as a condition?" Thorin shook his head. "No, you don't understand. I want to invite you to join my expedition, not Gandalf's." Dewey was stunned for a moment, then he understood what Thorin meant and was stunned. "My goodness, the expedition hasn't even been formed yet, and this dwarf prince is trying to seize power and snatch the leadership of the expedition from Gandalf. Is he trying to poach Gandalf's people now?" Dewey was speechless, but he shook his head and said, "Although I have agreed to join the Fellowship, it is only as a collaborator. I will not take orders from anyone, whether you or Gandalf." Thorin's expression darkened at this. Ever since the dragons took over Lonely Mountain and he was forced into exile, with no one to help him, he no longer trusted anyone, not even Gandalf. However, retaking the Lonely Mountain was not only the obsession of his father, King Thrain, but also his ambition to revive Durin's clan. So he proposed a new deal. The previous terms remain unchanged. "As the heir of Durin's clan, I formally invite you to join the Fellowship. You do not need to obey my orders, but you must promise to help me retake the Lonely Mountain with all your strength." "How about that?" Dewey's eyes flickered. He knew that even without him, Thorin and his men would eventually recapture the Lonely Mountain. But he still shook his head and chuckled. "Your request is quite high. A sword isn't worth that much." Thorin gritted his teeth and said, "Plus 1/10 of the Lonely Mountain's treasure. If you help me recapture the Lonely Mountain, I'll share its treasures with you." Dewey perked up at this. He knew the Lonely Mountain's treasures were piled high, making it the richest place in all Middle-earth. Even just 1/10 would be a fortune comparable to nations. "Yes, but we have to sign a contract," Dewey agreed, "but also set conditions." After all, he remembered that Dewey had a family affliction called dragon sickness. Any contact with the Lonely Mountain's treasures would cause him to lose his mind, become mad and paranoid, and become obsessed with greed and possessiveness. However, Thorin was unaffected by the dragon sickness and readily agreed to Dewey's terms. He also believed that the contract would allow Dewey to be more dedicated to helping them recapture the Lonely Mountain, and not give up halfway. So, with mutual consent and witnessed by the dwarf kin and elders, Dewey and Thorin signed the contract. The contract stipulated the conditions for Dewey to join the expedition and help the dwarves retake the Lonely Mountain. In return, Durin's clan would mobilize their entire tribe to help him forge the ancient sword, and upon retaking the Lonely Mountain, they would give Dewey 1/10 of its treasure. Dewey then remained in dwarven territory. Thorin and other dwarven craftsmen began to forge Dewey's sword. The forging took place not in the dwarven town, but deep within the mines and tunnels of the Blue Mountains, thousands of meters underground, using the heat of the magma to melt the ancient sword. The dwarves did not shy away from Dewey during the forging process, so Dewey had the privilege of riding a dwarven cable car and pulley, thousands of meters underground. Here, the temperature soared, and the ground beneath was a sea of fiery red magma. On the massive basalt forge, Thorin and 2 other craftsmen, bare-armed and clad in leather armor, wielded massive hammers, hammering relentlessly at the red-hot iron. The 3 men moved in unison, striking the iron in a mysterious, complex rhythm. A rhythmic clinking sound sent sparks flying, and the sound echoed through the cave, like a war song. Dewey stood not far away, watching the scene silently, his eyes filled with anticipation. The scorching heat seemed to have no effect on him. He still wore his thick, long cloak, which exuded a coolness that felt like the breeze of a mountain stream, dispelling the surrounding heat. Chapter 38, Flaming Sword. The dwarves had promised to forge the finest sword for Dewey, and naturally, they did so without purpose. To enhance the sword's quality and power, they forged it with a portion of their treasured mithril. Mithril is an extremely rare and precious magical metal, as light as silver yet stronger than steel. Just a small addition to ordinary steel can create a sword that can cut through iron with impenetrable force. Even Nanaya, the Ring of Water, one of the 3 elves' rings, is forged from mithril. The only known source of mithril ore is the mines of Moria, inhabited by the Balrog. However, since the Balrog took over the mines, mithril has become increasingly valuable and scarce. The fact that it could now be used to forge Dui's sword was a testament to the dwarves' sincerity. It also demonstrated a depth of Durin's desire to reclaim the Lonely Mountain. Through continuous forging and tempering, Thorin and 2 dwarven craftsmen spent 3 full days gradually reshaping the ancient sword. Before the final tempering, Dui intervened. Under the bewildered gazes of the 3 dwarves, he approached the red-hot sword, drew his wand, and using it as a writing brush, waved it across the blade. Mysterious runes appeared on the blade surface. Infused with magical power, the runes glowed faintly, like flowing symbols, becoming even more mysterious and extraordinary. What kind of writing is this? Thorin and the 2 craftsmen, who had never seen such writing before, were astonished and curious. They could sense the magical power imbued in it, comparable to Elvish and Dwarven writing. Dui replied, "It's runes." These days, besides monitoring the sword's progress, he had been diligently studying the dictionary of runes. While not an expert, he had learned a few basic runes and inscribed them on the sword. Upon hearing Dui's answer, the dwarves looked at each other in bewilderment. Runes? Are we so ignorant? How could we not remember these symbols and runes? Dui slapped his head. He had forgotten that the Dwarven language was also called runes, but Dwarven runes were different from the runes of the magical world. To be more precise, the Dwarven runes originated from the writing invented by the Sindarin elves, a variant of Elvish, also called Shires. The runes described in the Dictionary of Runes are an ancient magical script from the Harry Potter world. Their inventor is said to be Odin, the king of the gods. To gain supreme wisdom, Odin hung himself upside down from the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights, suffering great pain. He then offered his right eye as a sacrifice, and obtained the secret of the runes from the Fountain of Wisdom. Of course, in the Harry Potter world, Odin, the king of the gods, is merely a powerful wizard from Northern Europe, but the runes he invented are the foundation of ancient magic and alchemy. He immediately explained, "These aren't your dwarven runes, but wizard runes, or, of course, magic runes." The dwarves were suddenly enlightened, yet even more curious and astonished. As far as they knew, there were only a few wizards in all of Middle-earth. And how could those few possess written language? But despite their curiosity, their immediate priority was completing the forging of the ancient sword. So began another round of quenching, hammering, and polishing. Finally, a golden longsword, over a meter long, emerged, exquisitely shaped and elegantly designed, with a natural curve, thickness, and pattern. Devoid of any ornate ornamentation. Originally cast from bronze, the ancient sword had been infused with mithril, resulting in a golden hue with a silvery white sheen and faint silver markings, resembling a sword forged from gold. Dui grasped the sword with amazement. The reforged blade was significantly smaller and lighter than before, yet it suited him even better. He attempted to imbue the sword with magical power, and instantly, several mysterious runes appeared on its blade. The runes shone, and the blade ignited with a searing red flame, releasing such intense heat that the air around it distorted. This was the power of the runes Dui had inscribed on the blade. While reading the Dictionary of Runes, he had considered combining dwarven forging with the power of runes to enhance the sword's power. So, he carefully selected runes representing fire, combined them in a simpler arrangement, and inscribed them on the blade. The result was just as Dui had envisioned, and even exceeded his expectations. Excitedly, he grasped the flaming sword and slashed at a nearby wooden stake. The stake was instantly split in two, and the flames from the sword's blade quickly climbed up and engulfed it. Thorin, one of the forgers, watched this scene with a wince in his eyes, awestruck by the power of the sword he had forged. If used against an enemy, even if they weren't slain by the sword, they would surely be consumed by the strange flames. As for the other 2 dwarven craftsmen, their shock faded into a wave of excitement. Having forged such a powerful sword, their names would be immortalized in history when its fame spread. This was an achievement many craftsmen dreamed of. After regaining his composure, Thorin asked Dui, "What will you name this sword?" Dui lowered the sword, and the flames vanished, the runes disappearing once more. The blazing sword, the blazing sword. Dui's eyes shone, caressing the sword as if it were a treasure. Thorin, recalling the moment the sword had unleashed flames, nodded. "The name is fitting. I hope it will shine brightly in your hands." "I will." The sword was finished, and Thorin and the 2 craftsmen spent another day crafting its scabbard. The scabbard was beautiful and sturdy, made of ivory inlaid with gold, intricately carved, and inlaid with gorgeous gems. Sheathing his flaming sword and strapping it to his waist with a leather belt, Dewey looked quite the knight now. Had he donned a suit of armor? Thorin looked at Dewey and urged him to stay. Why don't you stay a few days? I've sent a raven to our distant cousins. The fellowship will be complete when they arrive. It wasn't that he and Dewey had developed a deep bond these days, but rather that he wanted to win Dewey over to his side, thereby allowing him and Gandalf to take a leading position in the fellowship. Dewey, naturally guessing Thorin's intentions, shook his head. During their time together, he had come to realize that Thorin Oakenshield was a stubborn and arrogant man, full of suspicion and jealousy, perhaps distrusting anyone except the dwarves. While it wasn't obvious yet, once the treasure of the Lonely Mountain unleashed his dragon disease, these traits would be magnified, becoming even more paranoid. While his relationship with Dewey seemed to be growing closer, it remained a purely transactional one, unchanged. So Dewey refused Thorin's entreaties, shaking his head and saying, "I'll be leaving now. I have things to attend to. I'll meet you in the Shire later." Then, under Thorin's silent gaze, Dewey, carrying his newly acquired sword, rode off in his carriage and left the dwarven town. Dewey wasn't lying. He'd noticed that 2 pots of mandrakes in his carriage had become restless over the past 2 days, and his acne had disappeared, indicating they were ripening. He couldn't handle the mandrakes in dwarven territory, so he planned to return to the Shire to further process them. The journey from the dwarven town to the Shire took about 7 days, and by the time he was halfway there, the 2 pots of mandrakes had matured and had opened a small bud. Mature mandrakes are extremely dangerous, their cries can be lethal, so Dewey had to regularly apply the petrification charm to them to prevent them from suddenly emerging from the soil and making a deadly noise. Carefully tending to the 2 pots of mandrakes, Dewey finally returned to the Shire, arriving at Hobbiton on the afternoon of the 7th day. Chapter 39 Making a Voodoo Doll. Dewey, Bilbo was overjoyed to see Dewey back, and hurried out of the yard to greet him. Dewey smiled warmly and said, "I'm back." Then he waved his hand, causing everything on the carriage to float down, and picked out a dwarf-forged dagger and handed it to Bilbo. "Is this for me?" Bilbo asked in surprise. Dewey nodded. This was a gift he had chosen specifically for Bilbo. Although it was not as sharp as a real weapon, it was also carefully crafted by dwarf craftsmen. He remembered that Bilbo would find his sting blade in the troll forest, but this dagger would be a good substitute until then. "Thank you. I like it very much." Bilbo was very excited, holding the dagger, stroking it repeatedly as if it were a treasure. "I'm glad you like it. Oh, by the way, can you prepare a darker room for me? I need it," Dewey said. "A dark room?" Bilbo asked, puzzled, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he replied, "The only place is the cellar deepest in the cave. There's nothing there except some wine. You can go there." "Yes, thank you, I see," Dewey nodded. He then placed the petrified mandrake back into the glass greenhouse, shielding it with layers of glass to block out the sound. He then brought another mandrake into the cellar, along with a pot of black mud, 13 caged bats, a large bag of sea salt, and a clay basin. The cellar was indeed dark, with only a small skylight for light to filter in, and no ventilation. But as soon as Dewey arrived, he sealed this last small window, preventing any light from entering. He then removed the mandrake from the pot and replaced it with the black mud he had brought with him. This mud had been dug from a graveyard at midnight on a full moon night. Dewey didn't want to recall the excavation, as it would damage his image as a wizard. After replacing the black mud from the graveyard, Dewey removed a bat from the cage and, expressionlessly, slashed its chest with a dagger, removed its heart, dripped the blood onto mandrake roots, and then buried the dead bat in the mud. The entire process was bloody and eerie, and anyone who witnessed it would have suspected him of being an evil wizard. After this, Dewey stopped. For the next few days, he only needed to water the mandrake with the blood of a bat's heart each day. Nothing else needed to be done. Every day, Bilbo would see Dewey heading into the cellar, and then emerging with a faint smell of blood. Although curious, Bilbo, as a good friend, restrained his curiosity and did not inquire further. On the 13th day, Dewey removed the last bat from the cage, removed its heart, dripped its blood onto mandrake roots, and then buried the bat in the mud. The soil surrounding the mandrake had become reeking, and the mandrake itself had become gloomy, like a plant growing in darkness, exuding an eerie and ominous aura. At midnight on the 13th day, Dewey pulled the mandrake from the black mud. He then filled the pot halfway with sea salt, placed the mandrake inside, and completely covered it with the remaining salt. He tamped the pot firmly to ensure the mandrake could not struggle out of the salt. After this, Dui covered the pot with a black cloth, preventing any light from reaching the interior. Only at night, when the moon was out, was the cloth removed, and the skylight opened, allowing moonlight to directly penetrate the salt. Over 7 days, the salt grew darker, eventually turning completely black. Dui then removed the mandrake from the salt. It was now dead. Its features distorted, its small eyes dark and eerie, and it exuded a dark and ominous aura. This was the cursed object crafted from the mandrake, the voodoo doll. Dark Powers, a guide to defense stated, to create a curse with mandrakes is like handing death's scythe into one's own hands. It reaps not only the suffering of the enemy, but also the soul of the caster. While Dui took the book's warning seriously, he didn't shy away from it. After all, dark magic like curses, if used excessively, can indeed affect a person's mind and warp their soul, but its power and effectiveness are unmatched by other magic. Furthermore, he had learned music magic from Tom, whose positive and joyful appeal could counteract the negative effects of dark magic. Therefore, he had no concerns about being influenced by it. Thinking of this, he felt grateful to Tom. This music magic, seemingly harmless, had been of great benefit to him. After completing the voodoo doll, Dui carefully wrapped it in cloth and placed it in a small wooden box. He had to keep it safe from prolonged contact, as it could easily bring bad luck. After disposing of the remaining items, Dui left the cellar. He had spent over 2 weeks crafting the voodoo doll. Gandalf hadn't been to Hobbiton during this time, and it was unknown what he was busy with. However, according to Dui, Gandalf and the dwarves would arrive in a few days, officially beginning the expedition. So Dewey spent the next few days reading the rune dictionary and waiting. One evening, just as Dewey and Bilbo sat down to dinner, there was a knock on the door. Bilbo looked at Dewey in confusion and surprise. Who could be knocking at this late hour? Dewey had a guess, perhaps Gandalf or the dwarves, but he kept his guess to himself. "Let's go and see," he said. Bilbo agreed, rose from his chair, and went to open the door. A bald dwarf stood in the doorway. "I am Dwalin, at your service," he introduced himself. Before Bilbo could react, Dwalin walked straight into the room and began to scrape his muddy feet against the wooden box at the door. "That's my mother's trousseau chest." Bilbo didn't even have time to stop him. But before Dwalin's foot could reach the box, it was dislodged by an invisible force, sending him careening off and nearly stumbling. Dwalin stared at the empty box, then spotted Doy sitting at the living room table. "Wonderful magic. You must be Doy the Black Wizard Thorin was talking about." "Nice to meet you," but his attention was immediately drawn to the food on the table. He walked over and plopped down in Bilbo's seat. "I've been walking for so long. I'm starving." He grabbed the food on the table and stuffed it into his mouth. His movements were rough and quick, and his bushy beard was covered in food crumbs, as if he had been starving for days. Chapter 40 The expedition team gathers. Dui frowned at this, his appetite instantly gone, and he dropped his knife and fork. Bilbo was stunned, but before he could question them, there was another knock on the door. This time it was Balin, a dwarf with a white beard. He entered with the same unceremonious manner and greeted Dwalin with familiarity. "Who are you? Why are you here?" Bilbo tried to stop them, but they ignored him and continued to search his storehouse. Then, another knock on the door followed. A group of dwarves arrived, Keely and Philly, Dory, Nori, Ori. Each one entered the house with a carefree manner and squeezed into the small dining table. The room suddenly became crowded and noisy. Bilbo stood aside, watching these uninvited guests, his face filled with helplessness and shock. His home seemed to have become a dwarven gathering place, and he had become an outsider. He watched with tears in his eyes as the dwarves raided his storehouse for food and wine. He could only look pitifully at Dewey, pleading. Dewey, seeing Bilbo's pent-up anger, unable to speak, Dewey patted his shoulder with a touch of amusement and sympathy, determined to vent his anger and teach these impolite dwarves a lesson. Petrification. 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 The living room fell silent. The 12 dwarves were frozen in place, their postures varied, only their eyes darting around in terror. Bilbo breathed a sigh of relief, grateful and thankful. "Thank goodness for you, Dewey," but before he could fully relax, there was another knock on the door. Bilbo, still a little frightened, dared not open it. Dewey walked over and opened it. Standing outside was Thorin Oakenshield. "Thorin, Dewey, they exchanged greetings with a nod. Is Gandalf here? Thorin asked as he entered. Dew shook his head. They haven't come yet. Something must have delayed them, Thorin frowned. Entering the living room, he saw the petrified dwarves. His pupils constricted, his expression grave. He demanded, "What's going on? What have you done?" Dew remained impassive. They were a bit rude. I just kept them quiet for a while. Thorin's expression darkened, feeling Dew was trying to intimidate him. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Please ask Wizard Dew to remove the spell from them. I'll wait for them to apologize." Dew shook his head. "It's not me they should apologize to, but the owner of this place. Sorry, I'm late." Gandalf's voice suddenly rang out from the door, interrupting the oppressive atmosphere. Bilbo entered, bowing, and beaming at the crowd. He asked, "Did I miss anything?" "Gandalf, you've arrived." Bilbo rushed forward to greet him, as if he had seen his savior. The oppressive atmosphere had almost suffocated him. "Hello, Bilbo," Gandalf greeted with a smile. Seeing the group of petrified dwarves standing at the table, his eyes twinkled. "It seems you all already know each other." No need for introductions. Seeing Gandalf's presence lightened the mood. Dewey, not intending to completely antagonize the dwarves, waved his hand and released the petrification spell. The dwarves, frozen for so long, collapsed limply, rubbing their aching limbs and groaning. They looked at Dewey with awe. After this turbulent time, everyone calmed down. Although he wasn't particularly welcoming to the dwarves, Bilbo brought out all the food and wine from the storehouse to entertain everyone. Dewey and Gandalf sat together at the table, while the dwarves, led by Thorin, sat together. Only Bilbo bustled back and forth between the kitchen and the table. As they ate dinner, they discussed the expedition. "We don't need to face the dragon Smaug head-on. We need a key figure, someone agile and undetectable, who can sneak into the halls of the Lonely Mountain and steal the Arkenstone," Gandalf said. "With the Arkenstone, you, Thorin, heir of Durin's line, can rally the dwarf army and retake the Lonely Mountain from the dragon." Gandalf's words intrigued Thorin. He looked at Gandalf. "Do you have a choice?" Gandalf didn't answer, but instead turned his gaze to Bilbo. Thorin followed Gandalf's gaze, his brow furrowed. "Gandalf, are you sure?" Thorin questioned. "Gandalf, are you sure?" In Thorin's opinion, the hobbit was completely useless except for his cooking skills. He was shorter than a dwarf, and his arms weren't as strong as a dwarf's. He was very weak and useless. Bilbo was a little overwhelmed by the attention and tried to hide behind Dewey. Thorin's brow furrowed even more at this. Gandalf, however, disagreed. He explained, "Hobbits are small and lithe, possessing a natural instinct for stealth. They excel at moving unnoticed, like secretly picking mushrooms or avoiding neighbors, making them perfect for thieves, and hobbits are never noticed by dragons unless they're stepped on. And Smaug has sharp eyes and a sharp nose. He's familiar with the sense of dwarves, elves, and humans, but he's never seen a hobbit and can't imagine what they're capable of." Thorin was somewhat persuaded by Gandalf's words, but he still had doubts about Bilbo's choice. Seeing that Thorin remained silent, Gandalf turned to Bilbo and said seriously, "So, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, are you willing to join the expedition and venture to the Lonely Mountain?" "Me?" Bilbo was caught off guard, stunned, and shook his head frantically. "No, I can't. I never take risks. Find someone else." Gandalf watched Bilbo hide behind Dewey, but he didn't give up. "Bilbo, don't you want to experience a great adventure? Think of all those adventure books you've read. Don't you want to visit the places described there and experience them for yourself? You could even write your own adventure book when you return, so that future generations will know about your adventures and be proud of you, and Oil is going with you on this adventure. Don't you want to go with him?" Bilbo looked at Oil with a hint of confusion. "Doyle, do you want me to go too?" Doyle shook his head, not joining Gandalf and persuading him. Instead, he said sincerely, "Whatever you decide, I will support you." Although he knew Bilbo would leave the Shire and encounter the One Ring, his destiny, and even his choice would determine the course of Middle-earth and become a key figure in the story of the Lord of the Rings, if Bilbo was content to live an ordinary life as a hobbit in the Shire, he would support him without hesitation. Hearing Oi's words, Bilbo's expression was torn and hesitant, his reason and courage straining. Finally, he took a deep breath and said to the crowd, "I will join." Chapter 41, The Fire of Arno. After saying this, as if all his courage had been drained away, he crouched down again, hiding behind Dewey. Hearing Bilbo's quick response, Dewey was stunned. Gandalf, on the other hand, was overjoyed. raising his glass. "Our Mr. Burglar has returned. Let us welcome Bilbo Baggins." To Bilbo Baggins, the dwarves cheered. Dewey, regaining his composure, felt a mixture of emotions. He hadn't expected Bilbo to agree so quickly. He remembered that Bilbo had only made the final decision to catch up with the Fellowship after Gandalf and the others had left. Clearly, this change of heart had been his. But since Bilbo had agreed, Dewey supported his decision and immediately had Thorin and Bilbo sign a contract, spelling out Bilbo's reward for helping the dwarves retake the Lonely Mountain. He didn't want Bilbo to receive nothing for his immense assistance. To reclaim the Lonely Mountain, Thorin generously promised to share its treasures. He would give Bilbo 1/14 of the treasure if he could find the Arkenstone and reclaim the mountain. As for Gandalf, he asked for no reward. After receiving the contract and signing his name, Bilbo felt a little dazed. If he received 1/15 of the Lonely Mountain's treasure as promised, he would become the richest hobbit in the Shire. Late at night, the dwarves, having drunk all the wine from Bag End, scattered across their beds, snoring like thunder. Bilbo, in the master bedroom next door, tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Partly because of the dwarves snoring, and partly because of the upcoming adventure. Dewey and Gandalf sat on the sloping lawn above Bag End's roof. One gazed at the stars, the other smoked his pipe silently. "I've been to the wastelands lately, exchanging information with some ranger friends. I've discovered that the orc forces in the Misty Mountains have been making a move lately, and there are even traces of several orc bands in the wastelands." Gandalf exhaled a puff of smoke, his voice grave. "So, I'll separate from you halfway and explore the Misty Mountains. I'll leave the expedition to you then." Gandalf had already mentioned this to him, so Dewey was prepared. He nodded and turned to Gandalf. "Is there anything I can help you with?" To be honest, he preferred to follow Gandalf than to go with the dwarves. Gandalf smiled and pointed to the sword at his waist. "I'd be happy to have you as my helper, but haven't you already made a deal with the dwarves to protect them? By the way, that's a nice sword. Did you name it?" "It's called the Flaming Sword." Seeing Gandalf's interest in his sword, Dewey drew it out with a touch of show-off and handed it to him. At the same time, he answered Gandalf's previous question nonchalantly. "I only promised to help them retake the Lonely Mountain, not to babysit them. And I don't think Thorin would like to see either you or me surpass him in prestige within the Fellowship." The mention of Thorin also gave Gandalf a headache. Although the Fellowship had just been formed, tensions between Thorin and Gandalf were already emerging. Thorin, a man with a strong desire for control, constantly sought to maintain control of the Fellowship. Gandalf, on the other hand, was reluctant to challenge for leadership and was even willing to yield to Thorin most of the time. However, as the initiator and organizer of the Fellowship, his immense strength and prestige naturally accorded him authority within the group. Furthermore, he wore the Ring of Fire, Naya, which instilled warmth, courage, and hope in those around him, instinctively drawing them to him and making him the center of attention. Therefore, unless either Thorin or Gandalf took the initiative to yield or leave, conflict was bound to flare up sooner or later during the Fellowship. However, this was not Dewey's concern. Gandalf didn't take it too seriously. With a wizard, Dewey, in his team, he felt more at ease and focused more on detecting the surge of dark forces. Forgetting Thorin, the troubled one, Gandalf focused on the golden sword before him. "The dwarven craftsmanship is truly astonishing." Gandalf stroked the sword with admiration. As he grasped the hilt, magical power surged into the blade, and it instantly ignited with a blazing golden flame, emitting a radiance like the sun. The flaming sword, it truly lives up to its name. Dewey was stunned by the golden flames released from Gandalf's flaming sword. This golden flame was different from the red flame he had experienced before, far hotter, more sacred, and more dangerous. Dewey could sense that if he touched it, even a touch, he would be instantly incinerated. "Gandalf, what kind of flame is this?" "It's the fire Larner, the fire of the sun," Gandalf explained. Dewey was shocked by this. In his own hands, the flaming sword released only red magical flames, but in Gandalf's hands, it unleashed the fire of the sun. What a disparity. Dewey felt as if the flaming sword, in his hands, was a treasure covered in dust, entrusted to the wrong person. But the thought that Gandalf was a Maya disguised as a wizard made Dewey feel a little better. After all, he was a god, and he was just an ordinary wizard. A disparity wasn't surprising, Dewey consoled himself. Condensing the flames, Gandalf noticed mysterious runes emerging on the sword and was intrigued. What kind of writing is this? I sense it holds secrets and power. It's magic runes, or you could call it wizard's writing, he explained, avoiding a duplication with the dwarven runes. Wizard's writing? Gandalf was astonished. He had never known wizards to have such a writing. But then a hypothesis popped into his mind, and he stared at Dewey in disbelief. Did you create this writing? He couldn't think of any other explanation. Gandalf, you think too highly of me. Dewey smiled wryly and shook his head. He dared not lie to the wise grey wizard, but he couldn't reveal the system either, so he could only offer a vague explanation. You can consider it a gift from heaven. Although I'm the only one who possesses this rune, I didn't create it, but this answer shocked Gandalf no less than his previous suspicions. The word given from heaven inevitably led Gandalf to misinterpret it, and he looked at Dewey with envy. I'm truly jealous of the favor bestowed upon you by the Allfather. Dewey was puzzled. What did the Allfather favor him? Had Gandalf misunderstood something? But Gandalf offered no explanation. After returning the flaming sword to Dewey, he returned to Bag End to rest. The next morning, after finishing the last of Bag End's stored food, the group prepared to set out. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 Departure. A group of 16 people gradually emerged from Bag End, preparing to depart under the rising sun. Bilbo, the last of the group, clutched his bag in one hand and the dagger Dewey had given him in the other, looking longingly at his home. Let's go. Dewey patted the hobbit's shoulder without saying anything else. But before leaving, he drew his wand and waved it at the door lock. Everyone was puzzled by his gesture. Dewey, what are you doing? Bilbo asked curiously. I'm cursing your door lock to prevent anyone from occupying your house while you're away, Dewey explained with a smile. The dwarves gasped and looked at Dewey in horror. The word curse was a strange word, instantly conjuring up thoughts of evil. Bilbo was stunned, frantically saying, No, it doesn't have to be that serious, Dewey. Remove the curse? The kind hobbit's face flushed with anxiety, fearing that others would be cursed. Dewey waved his hand, reassuring him, Don't worry. It's just a minor curse. It will only make anyone who forces the lock grow hair all over their body. It's a warning, nothing serious. It was a minor curse he'd learned from the curse and counter-curse section, and it had no lethal power, a practical joke. Bilbo breathed a sigh of relief after hearing Dewey's explanation. As long as it wasn't meant to harm anyone, it was fine. Gandalf, upon hearing this, looked at Dewey in surprise. Dewey, are you familiar with curses? Not really, just a little understanding. Dewey waved his hand. Gandalf gave him a meaningful look, unconvinced that he truly understood. Before leaving, Dewey had taken the last remaining pot of mandrake from the greenhouse. He intended to use it to plant seeds. Once it bloomed and bore fruit, it would produce magical seeds. As long as he found a plot of land rich in magic to plant it, Dewey wouldn't need to use his magic to nurture the transformation. The resulting plant would be a magical mandrake. Furthermore, the mandrake's cry could sometimes have unexpected effects. Departing Bag End, Dewey, as usual, rode in a carriage pulled by his pony, Derpy. Bilbo and Gandalf also shared a spot. As for the dwarves, they were too numerous to fit in, so they had to walk to the village before setting off on horseback at the Green Dragon Inn. After a brief stop at the Green Dragon Inn, they continued their journey, heading east along the east-west road. After several days of walking, they crossed a brandy bridge and finally left the Shire. Passing the old wood, Dewey paused and entered it with Gandalf. Cutting a branch from a Huorn vine, they leisurely left the wood amidst the angry rustling of the trees. He had previously promised to make a wand for Gandalf, and this piece of vine wood was the shaft he had chosen. Since Gandalf's wand was made of vine wood, Dewey didn't need to try out a variety of woods, he simply chose vine wood. Thorin was somewhat displeased with Dewey and Gandalf for leaving and delaying their journey, but aside from a grimace, he said nothing further. They continued on their journey, soon reaching the Barrow Downs. Because of their delay in the old wood, they were unable to leave the Barrow Downs before dark, forcing them to rest in an open area. Everyone, be careful tonight. Although we're not close to the Barrow Downs, we still need to be wary of wights, Gandalf warned them sternly. Everyone became alert, and Bilbo, clutching his dagger, glanced around, feeling a white might burst from the darkness at any moment. Thorin, even more displeased, glanced at Gandalf and Dewey and snorted coldly, "If you hadn't entered the Old Wood, delaying us for so long, we'd already be out of the Barrow Downs and wouldn't have needed to be so cautious." Dewey frowned. If it weren't for his deal with Thorin, he sometimes really didn't want to bother with him. Gandalf remained unperturbed by Thorin's accusation, smiling and apologizing. "My apologies. Dewey generously offered to make me a wand, and I was a bit impatient, so I dragged Dewey off to the old forest to find suitable wood, but don't worry too much. Whites don't usually leave the vicinity of the Barrows easily, so we just need to remain vigilant." "Alright, I'll get you some things so you can have a good night's rest," Dewey said, rising and waving his wand. The carriage rapidly transformed and expanded, transforming into a yurt large enough to accommodate everyone. The grass on the ground became a thick, soft blanket, and the leaves transformed into green sleeping bags. Seeing Dewey's transformation with a wave of his hand, everyone was stunned and astonished. "Am I drunk? Or am I hallucinating?" Bomber, the fattest of the dwarves, asked dazedly. The other dwarves stared wide-eyed, unable to resist touching the transformed objects around them. Once they felt the real thing, they were even more astonished. Thorin was equally astonished, staring intently at Dewey, unsure what to say. He realized Dewey's abilities had surpassed his own expectations. Bilbo, on the other hand, was relatively calm. After all, he had witnessed all sorts of magical arts before, so he took it well. Gandalf surveyed his surroundings, then picked up a sleeping bag and said cheerfully, "It seems we're all blessed for the rest of our journey. These conditions are much more comfortable than staying in an inn." Dewey continued to cast spells around the yurt before addressing the group. "Alright, everyone, go inside and rest. I've set up a magical barrier around the yurt. No need to stand guard. We can continue our journey tomorrow morning." After witnessing Dewey's magical prowess, everyone agreed and filed into the yurt to rest. At midnight, snoring filled the yurt like thunder. Thick, dark clouds enveloped the sky in complete darkness. Outside the yurt, apart from the sound of horses chewing grass, everything was silent, not even the chirping of insects. Suddenly, a chill descended, and the temperature plummeted. A mist appeared inexplicably, silently approaching the yurt, as if to devour it. A dozen or so ponies outside the yurt suddenly became restless, thrashing the ground with their hooves and snorting, attempting to break free from their reins. Suddenly, a towering dark figure, at a speed barely perceptible to the naked eye, burst forth from the mist, ignoring the frightened horses and charging directly towards the yurt. It smelled the scent of living beings, many of them. Just as the corpse demon, with a ferocious grin on its face, thought it would burst through the yurt in a split second and burst into a bloodbath, it collided with an invisible, yet solid, barrier. The immense force of the impact sent the corpse demon careening back, rippling the barrier. Chapter 43, The Demonic Corpse. What's wrong? What happened? A loud noise startled everyone inside the yurt. "Beware! Enemies!" Gandalf quickly stood up, grabbed his staff, and shouted. The gem atop it shone with a dazzling white light, illuminating the tent. The dwarves drew their weapons, swords, axes, and hammers. Bilbo, suddenly awakened from his sleep, was terrified. Having never seen such a scene before, he quickly imitated the dwarves and drew his own dagger, his nerves pounding. Dewey, awakened just as the magic barrier was attacked, drew his wand and shouted, "Don't panic, everyone. I've set up a magic barrier outside. The enemy can't get in for now." He immediately rushed out of the yurt, followed closely by Gandalf and the others. "It's a white," everyone exclaimed in surprise as they saw the tall, dark figure not far away. Dewey's shock was no less than the others. He clearly remembered the expedition never encountering a white, so why was it so different now? Could it be the butterfly effect of this time traveler? The white, seeing the crowd, grew even more excited, transforming into a dark shadow and charging again. "Prepare for battle," Thorin shouted, raising his sword. The other dwarves also raised their weapons, ready to charge. Petrify, without giving the dwarves a chance to strike, Dewey skillfully cast a petrifying spell on the white. Then, lashing out from his waist, the dagger instantly pierced the white's head. The dagger, forged by the last prince of Cardolan to fight the Witch King of Angmar, possessed the power to restrain dark forces. Used against the white, it was naturally effective. The white let out a desperate roar, and a black aura rose from its body into the sky before exploding and dissipating. As the white collapsed into a pile of bones, the dwarves fell silent for a moment, then erupted in cheers. Dui's prowess earned the dwarves recognition and respect. Dui's expression remained stern. He waved his hand for silence. Everyone, beware. The fog hasn't dissipated yet. There are more whites. The dwarves fell silent at this, their guard rising as the thickening fog thickened around them. Gandalf frowned at the fog, raised his staff, and slammed it down on the ground. A tremendous force emanated from him, rapidly spreading outward. Wherever the force reached, the fog receded, dispersing within a radius of 10 miles. As the fog dissipated, whatever was hidden within was revealed. But when everyone saw the exposed whites, they gasped. The whites were swarming in numbers, hundreds of them densely packed together. Dui's pupils shrank. So many whites, more than the last time they saw them at the Barrow Downs. Had they come out in full force? The exposed whites, no longer hiding, roared and rushed frantically towards Dui and his companions. With lightning speed, they were in their path in an instant, slamming heavily into the magical barrier, sending ripples of light. Seeing the whites failing to break through the magical barrier, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Keely and Feely, the youngest of the dwarves, were still challenging the whites outside. But the next moment, the whites drew their ancient swords, bared with them, and brandishing them, cursed and ominous, they slashed at the magical barrier. The white swords possessed the power to break magic, and under the whites' relentless blows, cracks appeared in the magical barrier, making it shaky. Just as Dui was about to strike, Gandalf stepped forward, patted his shoulder, and said with a smile, "Leave it to me this time. I can't let you do it alone." Dui remained motionless, naturally trusting Gandalf's strength. The next second, the magical barrier finally shattered under the attack of the whites. Gandalf raised his staff high and struck the ground with a thunderous cry, "Evil, retreat!" A halo of holy white magic exploded like a tsunami, and hordes of whites roared and lunged. Before their sharp claws could even touch the edge of his cloak, they were blasted back by the blast of thunder, instantly rendered defenseless. Dui's eyes trembled with shock. He wondered when he would ever again possess such power. But just as he thought the battle was almost over, a shadow of death suddenly descended upon them. Evil dark words echoed around them, and they felt a piercing chill. Their blood froze, their hearts clutched by an icy hand. Instantly, they were filled with fear and despair, their hearts and minds pounded by the darkness, driving them to madness. Then, a towering, crowned white emerged from the darkness. His eyes burned with a dark light, emanating a chilling aura, as if the shadow of death had emerged from darkness itself. Just as everyone thought they were about to sink into despair and madness, a surge of warmth, courage, and hope enveloped them, dispelling the fear and coldness within their hearts. Then, countless joyful, vibrant golden notes appeared, swirling around them. The music they produced was powerful, filling them with an involuntary sense of joy and warding off the negative influence of the white. Everyone looked towards Dui and saw that the pulsating notes were emanating from his wand. But Dui, watching the white appear in the distance, felt a sense of formidable danger. He remembered this feeling, and it was even more intense than before. He immediately shouted to Gandalf, "Gandalf, he is the Witch King of Angmar. He is possessing a white." Gandalf's expression grew solemn upon hearing this. He raised his wand toward the white, and his old, commanding voice, shrouded in thunder and lightning, boomed, "Nazgul, dark spirit, this is not your territory. Return to your underworld." The white-possessed Witch King of Angmar paused, but uttered a cold, harsh, ancient word as cold as hell, "Wizard, you cannot stop me." Furious, Gandalf shot a bolt of lightning from his staff, striking the white. The white was blasted to ash. The next moment, a fallen white stood up, opened its flaming eyes, and scoffed triumphantly, "You cannot kill me, wizard. I am 1,000 miles away. What can you do to me?" Gandalf said nothing. Another bolt of lightning shattered the white possessed by the Witch King of Angmar. As expected, the Witch King of Angmar reappeared, possessing yet another white. This time, he turned his dark gaze upon Dui, a fierce grin etched in his eyes. "Young wizard, I told you I would remember you. You are marked by me, and you can never escape. You will fall into darkness and become my trophy." Facing the Witch King's resolute gaze, Dewey's heart tightened. He had been marked? When had this happened? Why hadn't he noticed? Dewey felt a wave of discomfort, irritated by the Witch King's smug and unbridled demeanor. He wanted to take him as a trophy? Was he sure he'd have him? Beware of breaking a tooth. Dewey snorted coldly. With a wave of his hand, a small wooden box flew out from his baggage and landed in his hand. He opened it and took out the contents wrapped in black cloth. Then he shouted to Gandalf, "Gandalf, don't destroy his body first. Make him incapable of resistance." Chapter 44 Casting a Curse. Gandalf didn't know what Dewey was going to do, but he trusted him nonetheless. With a powerful blow of his staff, he struck down the wight possessed by the Witch King of Angmar. Expelliarmus, Dewey's curse followed. The spell struck the wight, knocking a brooch from its body and sending it swiftly flying toward Dewey. The brooch, imbued with the Witch King's dark power, was filled with ominousness and curse, exactly what Dewey desired. He unwrapped the black cloth, revealing a voodoo doll crafted from mandrake. He placed the brooch on the doll, and the aura of the brooch instantly blended with the doll's, transforming it into something resembling the wight possessed by the Witch King of Angmar. The Witch King, possessed by the wight, sensed a subtle connection between the doll in Dewey's hands and himself. This feeling unsettled him, and he prepared to leave the wight's body. But the next moment, a soul-piercing pain washed over him, forcing him to let out a sharp, piercing scream. Dewey, clutching a dagger made of a venomous snake fang, stabbed the voodoo doll in the heart. The doll, as if alive, let out a similarly piercing scream, its face aghast in agony. Everyone was stunned by the sight. Watching Dewey's impassive face as he stabbed the doll, and the wight's agony, the dwarves swallowed their saliva, staring at him in awe. Casting a curse requires complete concentration, utmost malevolence, and immense magical power. Dewey continued his movement, piercing the heart with a venomous dagger before moving to the doll's forehead and stabbing it again. Bang! To Dewey's surprise, the doll, after a shrill scream, suddenly disintegrated in his hand, crumbling into a pile of ash. This sudden turn of events caught Dewey completely off guard. But the final result was not in vain. The corpse demon possessed by the Witch King of Angmar let out an unwilling and painful roar, and instantly exploded violently, turning into ashes. The other corpse demons suddenly seemed to have lost their support, and the evil power in their bodies dissipated. They fell to the ground and turned into bones. Everyone was silent for a moment, looking at Dewey with awe. But Dewey was not in the mood to pay attention to them at this time. He looked at the voodoo doll in his hand that turned into ashes, and felt a pain in his flesh. He spent so much effort to make the voodoo doll, but in the end, it was completely scrapped after being used to curse the Witch King of Angmar once. This really distressed him. After all, the voodoo doll is not a disposable consumable. But he did not expect the Witch King of Angmar to be so powerful that a voodoo doll would be scrapped after a single curse. Gandalf approached. He examined the ashes in Dewey's hands, sensing the lingering curse and dark magic. He looked at Dewey with some concern. "Dewey, please excuse my ramblings as an old man, but be careful not to overindulge yourself in this power. You will easily become prey to darkness, I understand." "Thank you for the reminder," Dewey nodded earnestly. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the Darklands, the Witch King of Angmar, leader of the Ring Wraiths, suddenly let out an agonized cry. His hollow armor and mask twisted and distorted in agony. His spirit, severely damaged, grew dimmer, seemingly on the verge of disintegration. This sudden change startled the other Ring Wraiths, who were unsure of what had happened. Just as they panicked, a massive, flaming eye appeared. Its rim was rimmed with red flames, its pupil of darkness as deep as the void. Within its vertical pupil emerged a tall, terrifying, pitch-black figure, emanating an aura of immense power and darkness. The eye's pupil, like a black hole, sucked in the weakened Witch King of Angmar, leader of the Ring Wraiths. Upon his return, he emerged rejuvenated and powerful. Has a new wizard appeared in Middle-earth? Find out his origins. Nothing can hinder my return. Ancient, dark words, like those from the abyss, emanated from the eye. Each syllable carried an indescribable evil power, imbued with the power of bewitchment and corruption. "Yes, my master," the Ring Wraiths bowed before the eye in awe and submission. The Fellowship, unaware of the darkness beyond, gathered the jewelry and accessories left by the wights and buried their bodies. As Gandalf had said, these wights were warriors who had fallen in battle, tainted by the dark power of the Witch King of Angmar, leaving them restless. Their remains should not be left to lie exposed in the wilderness. Dewey approached Gandalf and asked for his help. "Gandalf, can you please take a look at me? Is there anything wrong with me? Why did the Witch King of Angmar say I was marked?" Gandalf's expression grew serious. "Don't resist. I'll examine you with my magic." He placed his staff against Dewey's chest, emitting a holy light. Enveloped by the light, Dui felt as if he were soaking in a hot spring, completely relaxed. But then, Gandalf sheathed his staff, his expression serious. Dui, perturbed by his expression, quickly asked, "Gandalf, what's wrong? Is there something wrong with me?" Gandalf shook his head and soothed him, "Don't worry. It's just a curse, probably contracted when you entered the Barrow Downs. It's not harmful, but it makes you more susceptible to dark creatures. It's like making you a more delicious meal." Dui said he wasn't comforted, and he couldn't figure out when he'd been cursed. He'd been so careful. "Gandalf, do you have any way to remove this curse from me?" Dui didn't want to bear such a curse, especially with the whites swarming out like today. He didn't want to encounter it again. Gandalf smiled and nodded. "This curse wouldn't be easily removed by others, but I'm your lucky ally." He raised his right hand, and a dazzling ruby ring appeared on his finger. The ring shone with a fiery, warm light, as if you were wearing a sun. "This is, Naya, the Ring of Fire." Dui's eyes widened, staring at the ring on Gandalf's hand in amazement. This was the first time he had seen Naya in person. It was so beautiful. Gandalf gently patted his shoulder with a hand holding the ring. A surge of energy like the sun swept through him, easily dispelling the trace of the curse hidden within him. Dui felt his body instantly clear, as if a burden had been removed, and he felt relaxed. "All right," Gandalf withdrew his hand. "Thank you, Gandalf," Dui said gratefully. "I'm glad I could help you." Gandalf shook his head and removed the ring from his finger. Seeing Dui's gaze unconsciously linger on his hand, he winked playfully and whispered, "This is a little secret. Remember to keep it secret for me." Dui nodded, amused and touched. The fact that Gandalf took the initiative to reveal the fire ring to Dui and help him remove the curse was a clear sign of his trust in him. Chapter 45, Sweeping the Ancient Barrow Mounds. After burying the remains of the White, everyone returned to their yurts to sleep. "Well, what's the matter? What happened?" Bomber, a portly figure, groggily emerged from his sleeping bag, looking at the group with confusion. Everyone fell silent, looking at each other in bewilderment. The situation had been urgent, and everyone had assumed they were all up, only they have failed to notice one person was missing. Gandalf and Dewey watched the scene with a smile. Thorin looked at his naive companion, took a deep breath, and said unhappily, "It's all right, go back to sleep." "Huh? Oh." Bomber actually slumped back into his sleeping bag, soon snoring loudly. Everyone was speechless again, but with a mix of emotions, they all crawled into their own sleeping bags. It was already late, and they had to set off early the next day. The next morning, everyone awoke one after another. Dewey waved his hand, transforming the huge yurt back into a carriage, and the carpets and sleeping bags vanished. It felt like a dream. Before they set off, they had one more thing to do. That was to share the spoils. Last night, hundreds of whites had left behind a large bag of jewelry and accessories, not to mention dozens of relatively intact ancient swords. Gandalf proposed that the spoils be divided equally among everyone. However, Thorin flatly refused. He believed that the dwarves had not contributed to the battle last night, and that Gandalf and Dewey had dealt with all the whites, so there was no reason to share the spoils. The other dwarves agreed with Thorin. Although they loved jewelry, their pride wouldn't allow them to accept charity. Faced with the stubborn dwarves, Gandalf didn't force his demands. However, he himself had no great need for treasure, so he only picked the most intact ancient sword as a weapon and left the rest of the spoils to Dewey. Dewey, looking at the spoils, all his own, suddenly proposed, "Yesterday I struck a heavy blow to the Witch King of Angmar, and his white minions have lost their power. Why not seize this opportunity to storm the dragon's lair and seize the white treasure within the barrow?" The dwarves' eyes lit up at this suggestion, and even Thorin, who was desperate to reach the lonely mountain as soon as possible, did not object. They refused to share Dewey and Gandalf's spoils, but that didn't mean they didn't crave the treasure. The dwarves were not wealthy these days, especially since Thorin Oakenshield, who had once made a living by forging iron and bartering resources from nearby humans to support Durin's people, was even forced to offer Dewey and his companions the Lonely Mountain's treasure as payment for their cooperation in the expedition. While Gandalf had no interest in the white treasure, he supported Dewey's proposal. So, instead of continuing on, the group turned and headed deeper into the Barrow Downs. The sky above the Barrow Downs was perpetually gloomy, and the mountains were perpetually shrouded in mist, creating a desolate and silent atmosphere. However, Compared to his last visit to the Barrow Downs, DUI noticed that the mist in the mountains had dissipated considerably, and the clouds in the sky had thinned. The group continued their journey without any obstacles, successfully reaching the Barrow Downs. Perhaps because the Witch King of Angmar had been severely wounded, and the Whites had lost their support, the Barrow Downs were devoid of any signs of White activity, and became extremely quiet. Gandalf tapped the ground with his staff, using his magic to detect the presence of the Whites. After receiving a signal, he warned the group, "The Whites are asleep and won't awaken soon. Be careful not to disturb them." The dwarves were thrilled by Gandalf's information. Without the threat of the Whites, the jewels buried within the barrows would be theirs. So the dwarves began their tomb raiding. Dwarves were naturally adept at digging mine tunnels, and digging a hole to the burial chamber was no problem for them. The Barrow Downs were primarily the burial grounds of the Dunedain, their burial objects naturally filled with priceless treasures. The dwarves' visits stripped the tombs bare. As for the Whites slumbering within, DUI and Gandalf eliminated any they encountered, preventing their resurgence. The dwarves spent 3 days at the Barrow Downs, exploring hundreds of chambers. Finally, due to their dwindling food supply, they reluctantly gave up their tomb raiding. Their final haul was a source of great satisfaction. With the exception of Gandalf, who gave up his share, everyone else's pockets were bulging with gold, silver, and jewels, even Bilbo. The dwarves were overjoyed, and even Thorin, the most serious, softened. They left the Barrow Downs with their bounty. Before departing, Gandalf gifted the Barrow Downs with a purification package, minimizing the evil influence inflicted by the Witch King of Angmar. In any case, the Whites slumbering in the Barrow Downs were unlikely to reawaken anytime soon. As for why the Witch King of Angmar wasn't simply exorcised, Gandalf explained that unless it were destroyed, his power over the Barrow Downs would remain forever. Returning to the main road, the group continued their journey, finally arriving at Bree around noon. Bree was a small, human settlement nestled in the heart of the Eriador Wilds, where the east-west road and the north-south road intersected. The transportation was excellent, and many traveling merchants, rangers, and others stopped here. Even elves occasionally passed through, traveling westward along the east-west road to the Grey Havens of Lindon, where they would board ships to cross the sea. The group stopped at the Prancing Pony Inn in Bree for a short rest and to restock their supplies. The wealthy dwarves were delighted, waving their hands with a flourish. "Master, bring up all the wine. We're going to drink to our heart's content today." Besides their love of money, the dwarves also greatly enjoyed alcohol, especially the pungent kind. Upon hearing the dwarves' words, the innkeeper suddenly became enthusiastic. Dwarves not only loved to drink, but they also drank in large quantities, measuring their drinks by the barrel, not the cup. Unwilling to refuse such guests, he immediately ordered the inn's hobbit servants to bring barrels of fine wine from the cellar and place them before the dwarves, allowing them to drink to their heart's content. Meanwhile, DUI's check-in system responded, "Hogwarts check-in system, locating Bree Town, Prancing Pony Inn, would you like to check in?" DUI remained calm, silently muttering, check-in successful. Congratulations on obtaining the Floo powder recipe and Floo network application." A flood of memories flooded into DUI's mind, and his eyes widened. Floo powder? This time, the check-in system was actually that. Chapter 46 Floo Network. DUI didn't know much about Floo powder, remembering only that it was a common means of transportation among wizards. Usually, when a wizard needed to go out, they grab a handful of Floo powder, stand in a fireplace, throw it down, and shout out their destination. The wizard would be engulfed in green flames and teleported to the destination fireplace. At this thought, DUI's eyes lit up. If Floo powder could teleport people, then why risk the long journey? Wouldn't they just use it to teleport to the Lonely Mountain? However, after reviewing the detailed description of Floo powder in his mind, he abandoned the idea. Because Floo powder needed to establish a Floo network to transport people, only with a Floo network could wizards accurately reach their destination. Otherwise, Floo powder alone had no way of pinpointing the location, and the distance was random, so wizards could be randomly transported to other fireplaces, making safety and accuracy impossible to guarantee. Furthermore, setting up a Floo network required first reaching the destination and using a spell to connect the destination fireplace to the starting fireplace before Floo powder could be used to teleport. Therefore, his plan to use Floo powder to teleport everyone to the Lonely Mountain was simply not feasible. Even if that didn't work, DUI planned to set up a flue network during his expedition and make flue powder, making future travel more convenient. Inside the Prancing Pony Inn, while the dwarves were still enjoying a drinking contest, DUI approached the counter and asked the innkeeper, "Master, do you know if there's any moonstone for sale nearby?" The knowledgeable innkeeper, upon seeing DUI in his wizard robes, immediately became respectful and polite. "My dear wizard, if you're looking for moonstone, there's a jewelry store in town. They should have some." DUI shook his head. "I want ordinary moonstone, not the kind you'd use for jewelry, and I need a lot." He wanted the moonstone to make flue powder, not the kind you'd use for expensive moonstone jewelry. Hearing DUI's words, the innkeeper shook his head, indicating that there was no way around it. After all, no one would collect ordinary moonstone except for jewelry. But he glanced at the dwarf who had come with DUI and suggested, "Master Wizard, why don't you ask the dwarves? They're naturally gifted at mining, so perhaps they'll know something about the moonstone." DUI suddenly realized that he had almost forgotten about the dwarves. "I see. Thank you for the suggestion." DUI thanked him, then asked, "By the way, could I borrow your fireplace?" The innkeeper was puzzled. Why would he borrow a fireplace? But no matter how he thought about it, he wouldn't refuse a guest, especially a wizard, so he said, "Please." He thanked the innkeeper again and went straight to the fireplace. He drew his wand and began to cast spells at the hearth. Gandalf noticed DUI's movements and came over to him, curiously watching him cast the spell. "DUI, what are you doing?" "I'm planning to build a flue network across Middle-earth. I've chosen this place as a node so that I can teleport here directly," DUI explained, explaining the concept of the flue network. Gandalf's eyes lit up more and more as he listened, his expression growing excited. He stared at Dewey intently. "What a brilliant idea. Dewey, you've astonished me. Once you establish the flue network, distances between Middle-earth will be shortened, and the people of Middle-earth will be more closely connected. Moreover, if any region is attacked by the forces of darkness, other regions will receive the news quickly and respond with swift support. This is a tremendous invention that could change the entire situation in Middle-earth." Well, could he say he simply wanted to make it easier to travel and hadn't considered any of this? Dewey felt a little unworthy of Gandalf's praise. After setting up the Prancing Pony's fireplace as a node in the flue network, Dewey only needed to continue setting up other fireplaces as nodes throughout his journey, gradually building a flue network covering Middle-earth. This way, anyone with flue powder could freely teleport to any fireplace in Middle-earth. Gandalf was intrigued by the concept of the flue network and offered to help him complete its construction to the best of his ability. His only request was that, after the flue network was established, DUI allow others to use it for teleportation. DUI readily agreed. Not only did he possess the method for producing flue powder, anyone wishing to use it would first need his permission. Even if he were to profit from it, his monopoly on flue powder and the flue network could easily net him a fortune far greater than the treasures of the dwarves of Lonely Mountain. Flue powder is made from moonstone, a translucent, milky white mineral with a moonlight effect. It's commonly used in jewelry and, in the wizarding world, as an ingredient in various potions, such as sedatives and love potions. Since its invention, flue powder has been strictly controlled by the Ministry of Magic. Only one company, Flue Bang, has been granted a production license. Its headquarters are in Diagon Alley, but the location of the gate remains unknown, as does its manufacturer, and the ingredients themselves, which are kept secret. Furthermore, the price of flue powder has remained constant for centuries, at 2 sickles per spoonful, a remarkably cheap price. But after DUI learned the recipe for flue powder, he understood why the monopoly on flue powder hadn't raised its price. It was simply because flue powder was so cheap to make. A 2 spoonful was a huge profit, not because the flue powder company had a conscience that justified such a reasonable price. "You want to find a moonstone vein?" Thorin looked up at DUI in surprise, and the other dwarves also looked over curiously. DUI nodded. "Yes, I want a large amount of moonstone to make a magical ingredient, but I don't know where to find it. You dwarves are good at mining, so I was wondering if you know of any moonstone mines." Thorin pondered for a moment and replied, "Moonstone veins are not common, but I do know the locations of some. One is in the Blue Mountains, where there are mines dug by ancient dwarves, but the ore has been mostly mined out. Another place is our destination, the Lonely Mountain, where there is an unmined moonstone vein. After we recapture the Lonely Mountain, I can give the mine to you, Bifur." a descendant of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, quickly replied, "The Misty Mountains are rich in mineral resources, and there should be moonstone veins as well. But it's now occupied by orcs, so obtaining moonstone may be difficult, I understand. Thank you all for the information." Dui nodded and thanked the dwarves. The locations of the moonstone veins provided by the dwarves were a bit far away and were not within Dui's reach for the time being, so he simply went to the jewelry store mentioned by the innkeeper. Chapter 47 Moonstone. Bree, a key thoroughfare in Eriador, was a bustling town with a bustling market and shops. Following the guidance of a hobbit servant assigned by the innkeeper, Dewey arrived at a jewelry shop. The owner, upon seeing Dewey, was immediately enthusiastic. "What jewelry would you like? We have rubies, sapphires, diamonds, and more. We have jewels crafted not only by human and hobbit artisans, but also by dwarf and elf craftsmen." "Oh, elven jewelry." Dewey was intrigued. Seeing Dewey's interest, the owner immediately produced a piece of elven jewelry, a silver brooch inlaid with white diamonds. Its simple elegance was indeed in keeping with elven taste. However, Dewey was a little disappointed. While it was elven jewelry, it was simply an ordinary work of art, devoid of any magical properties. So, after a quick glance, he stopped looking and asked directly, "Do you have any moonstones?" The jewelry store owner was a little disappointed to see Dui show no interest in elven crafted accessories, but after hearing the next question, he perked up and quickly replied, "We have moonstones, too." He then produced a box and opened it, revealing jewelry made from moonstone. "Besides this jewelry, do you have any rough moonstones?" Dui asked. The owner gave him a curious look, but nodded. "Yes, I do, but we don't usually sell them raw," Dui interrupted. "I'll take as many as you have, price is not a concern." He pulled out a ring set with a large ruby and tossed it to him. "Is this enough?" While moonstone can be used to make jewelry, its value is far less than that of rubies. The shopkeeper quickly took the ring and examined the high-quality ruby embedded in the gold. His eyes lit up, a smile spreading across his face. He nodded quickly. "That's enough. Please wait a moment, sir. I'll get you all the rough moonstones from our inventory." He slipped the ring into his chest pocket and trotted into the backyard. A moment later, he emerged, breathless, carrying a sack on his back. He carefully placed the sack in front of Dewey and opened it, showing him, "Are you satisfied, sir?" 30 pieces of moonstone in total, all top quality. Dewey peered into the bag. The moonstones ranged in size, from the size of a fist to the size of a pigeon egg. Because they were meant for jewelry, they were all of the highest quality, shimmering with a multicolored halo. Dewey nodded. "Not bad, honestly. It was a bit of a waste to use it for flue powder, but he couldn't find any other sources of moonstones at the moment, so he could only indulge for now. By the way, boss, where did you get all these raw moonstones? Could you tell me?" The jewelry shop owner had no intention of keeping it secret. "I got them from a passing merchant. I heard they also traded them with the elves near the Misty Mountains. The elves there are elusive, but they regularly come to Bruman's Ferry to trade with the merchants." Having received more information on the moonstone's source, Dui left the jewelry shop with a bag of moonstones and returned to the Prancing Pony Inn to reunite with the others. However, upon returning, Dui discovered they had become the talk of the town. Everyone in the inn knew about Dui and his team's victory over the Whites and their raid on the Barrow Downs, and the news spread rapidly throughout the town. The reason for all this was due to the drunken revelations of the loudmouthed dwarves. The terror of the Barrow Downs was known throughout Eriador, especially to the residents of Bree, who lived right next to the Barrow Downs. The fear of the Barrow Downs had been passed down from generation to generation, ingrained in their very blood. The residents of Bree were in an uproar when the dwarves announced that they had vanquished the Whites in the Barrow Downs and that they would not return for decades. As the main force in the victory over the Whites, Dewey and Gandalf received the most attention. However, Gandalf clearly wasn't about to accept the credit. While Dewey was away from the inn, he took most of the credit for the White slaying. As soon as Dewey entered the inn, he was treated like a star. "Let's welcome back Mr. Dwar, the White Bane. He's the one who vanquished those terrifying demons of the Barrow Downs for us. Let's toast him," the innkeeper shouted, a look of immense honor. To Mr. Dwar, the White Bane, everyone raised their glasses and shouted, even Gandalf joining in the cheers. The innkeeper's smile widened as the guests clamored for drinks. "Gandalf, you've really put all the trouble on me." Dewey finally managed to shake off the enthusiastic Bree residents, sat down across from Gandalf, took a deep breath, and let out a helpless, wry smile. It was clearly the two of us who killed the whites, and you contributed more than I did. Why are you giving me all the credit? Gandalf smiled, looking at his somewhat embarrassed appearance. Young men should enjoy the glory. I, an old man, am past that age, so I won't get involved in all this excitement, and don't be so self-deprecating. If you hadn't severely damaged the Witch King of Angmar with your curse, we wouldn't have achieved such a great victory. You deserve this honor? Someone didn't know which warrior had actually gone to investigate, but within half a day, word reached Bree, confirming the dwarves' report. The residents of Bree were even more excited, and the mayor of Bree even visited Dewey and his companions in person, presenting them with a gold medal inscribed with Whitebinder. Dewey's reputation as the Whitebinder was thus firmly established. Because of this delay, the group decided to stay overnight at the Prancing Pony Inn and set out again the next morning. That night, Gandalf took the initiative to introduce Dewey to a stranger. Dewey, this is a ranger friend of mine. He's just come from the Barrow Downs and wants to visit you, Ranger. Dewey looked him over. He was a tall, handsome man with black hair and gray eyes, about 30 years old. He wore a black cloak and long leather boots, a bow slung across his back, and a long sword at his waist. The man's voice was deep and powerful, his gray eyes shone with a sense of vicissitudes. I've heard of your great name, Dewey, the Tree Feller, the Slayer of Whites, the Black-Robed Wizard. I'm Alpha, and it's an honor to meet you. Chapter 48 The Dunedain. Dewey looked him up and down, a thoughtful expression on his face. Are you a Dunedain? Surprise flickered in the man's eyes, and he nodded slightly. I didn't expect anyone knew of us. I heard about it, too. There's a band of rangers in the wastes of Eriador, secretly maintaining peace in the region. Dewey knew of the Dunedain. They were descendants of the former Numenoreans, possessing strength and lifespan far beyond that of ordinary humans. But could this Dunedain ranger be seeking him out because he had led his men to rob his ancestors' tombs? He remembered these northern Dunedain as the remnants of the former kingdom of Arnor, and their ancestors were buried in the Barrow Downs. What do you want from me? Dewey didn't believe that Dunedain was simply visiting. Alpha didn't mince words. I heard you, Wizard Dewey, have some ancient swords you've obtained from the whites. Could you show them to me? Dewey readily agreed, as long as the tomb robbery wasn't involved. After defeating the whites, Dewey had amassed a wealth of gold, silver, and jewelry, as well as ancient white swords. After receiving one of the white swords, Alpha examined it carefully before reluctantly returning it to Dewey. This sword is forged using the lost art of Nomenor forging. Even after thousands of years, its sharpness remains undiminished. It also bears the insignia of an Arnor noble. I believe it belonged to a noble of the kingdom of Arnor. Alpha made a request. Nomenor forging techniques are lost, and we've been trying to trace their origins. Wizard Dewey, would you be willing to trade us a few of these swords? Make your request, and we'll do our best to satisfy it. Dewey had been agonizing over what to do with his white swords, and Alpha's request was exactly what he wanted. He thought for a moment, then nodded, saying, I have dozens of ancient swords, all of which I can give you. Alpha was delighted. He had originally hoped to trade Dewey for just a few, but Dewey's willingness to give them all was a welcome surprise. He quickly said, Wizard Dewey, what are your requests? We'll satisfy you, as long as we can. You Dunedain have traveled extensively, so you must be knowledgeable. I'd like to ask you to help me collect various herbs from Middle-earth, especially those imbued with magical powers. Living herbs would be best. Hearing Dewey's request, Alpha was somewhat surprised and hesitated. Don't worry, Wizard Dewey. We'll do our best to help you collect the herbs, but it may take time. Dewey waved his hand. Don't worry, I'm not in a hurry. As long as you can help me collect as many herbs as possible, that's all I need. Alpha breathed a sigh of relief and immediately agreed. Thus, the deal was struck at the inn. Both sides were delighted. Alpha acquired a sufficient number of ancient white swords, giving him the opportunity to trace the lost Nomenorian forging techniques from the swords and restore the former glory of the Dunedain. Dewey, on the other hand, could leverage the Dunedain's influence to obtain more Middle-earth herbs. Herbs are the foundation of potions, but many of the magical herbs in Harry Potter's world are not found in Middle-earth. Dewey planned to first collect herbs from Middle-earth, and then, once his knowledge of potions and herbalism had amassed, he would find substitutes and replicate various magical potions. After completing the transaction, Alpha, carrying the dozens of newly acquired ancient white swords, departed the town overnight. Dewey and his companions stayed at the Prancing Pony Inn for the night, setting out again the next morning. However, DUI was speechless to find that almost half of the dwarves' supplies were alcohol. It was another moonlit night. They camped in the wilderness, and DUI once again used transfiguration to conjure a tent and sleeping bag. When most people were asleep, DUI went outside the tent and poured out a bag of moonstones, placing them in the moonlight. He then drew his wand and, as if counting, tapped each moonstone with it. With each tap, magic flowed through the wand into the moonstones. Moonstones are a good reservoir for magical energy. Infused with magic, they glowed a pale blue and began to absorb the moonlight. Every night, DUI would take out the moonstones and place them under the moonlight to dry. This practice would continue until the next full moon. His companions naturally noticed DUI's behavior, but DUI didn't explain, and they didn't dare to question him. The journey was uneventful, and they soon arrived at Weatherdup. Weatherdup is the highest and southernmost mountain in the Weather Hills, adjacent to the main east-west road. In Sindarin, it's called Amansul, meaning Hill of the Wind. Weatherdup was once a crucial frontier fortress in the northern kingdom of Arnor. The Numenoreans constructed a massive watchtower atop it, housing the largest and most powerful stone of wisdom, Amansul, to monitor, irradiate and communicate with other stones. However, as Arnor fractured and weakened, the Witch King of Angmar besieged Weatherdup in 3rd Age 1409. The Tower of Amansul was destroyed and razed to the ground, and the Stone of Wisdom within was tragically lost in the ensuing battle and sank to the seafloor. For over 1,000 years, the Tower of Amansul remained unrebuilt, leaving only a ring of stone walls as a reminder of its former glory. Dewey, eager to attempt to sign in at Weatherdup, suggested staying there for the night. Everyone agreed. Arriving at the ruins of Amansul's tower, Gandalf gazed at the shattered ruins, his eyes filled with memories. He sighed, "I remember the grandeur of Amansul's tower vividly, but time has passed, and now I can no longer see what I once saw." Hearing Gandalf's recollection, Bilbo curiously inquired, "Gandalf, have you seen the Tower of Amansul?" Gandalf nodded and recalled, Amansul's tower was magnificent, 1,000 feet high, reaching into the clouds. It was the tallest tower in all of Eriador. The Stone of True Knowledge housed within it could be seen from the edge of the wastes thousands of miles away. 1,000 feet? DUI was astonished. That was the equivalent of over 300 meters, or hundreds of stories in his previous life. The dwarves were also amazed. Even for them, skilled builders, such a tall building would have been a monumental undertaking. But DUI's sigh soon faded as the system finally responded. Hogwarts sign-in system, locating Windcloud Peak. "Do you want to sign in? Sign in," DUI muttered to himself. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, Tower of Amansul. Successful sign-in. Congratulations on receiving the Invisibility Book of Invisibility. DUI, looking at the magic book before him, which only he could see, had already managed to examine it without a ripple in front of everyone. However, upon seeing the contents within, DUI couldn't help but feel delighted. Invisibility Book of Invisibility described various invisibility spells, including invisibility spells that made objects transparent, disfigurement spells that blended into the surroundings like a chameleon, concealment spells that hid one's form and even concealed auras and magical fluctuations, confusion spells that interfered with others' thoughts and perceptions, and shielding spells that included muggle-repelling charms. It could be said that the invisibility spells described in the book encompassed every aspect of invisibility, from visual interference to mental and perceptual interference. It was a virtual encyclopedia of invisibility. DUI briefly glanced at the table of contents and put the book away. Now was not the time to delve into the contents. DUI, use your magical powers to conjure up a tent and a comfortable bed. "I want to sleep," the sleepy, portly dwarf, Bomber, yawned, interrupting DUI's thoughts. The others looked at him expectantly. Thanks to DUI's transfiguration, they hadn't suffered much these days. It was difficult to go from luxury to frugality, and no one wanted to sleep in the wilderness again, sleeping on the ground. DUI, staring at them eagerly, smiled and was about to agree. But then, looking at the rubble around him, a somewhat unrealistic idea struck him. He wanted to see if he could use a repair spell to repair the damaged tower. The more he thought about it, the more eager he became. He immediately shouted to everyone, "Everyone, get out of here, Everyone was confused, but they followed Dewey's instructions and left the area around the tower ruins, stopping at a distance before looking at him with puzzled curiosity. After ensuring that no one would be affected, Dewey stood in front of the ruins and waved his wand. Restore, magical power continuously flowed from his wand. As everyone watched in astonishment, it was as if time had reversed, and the surrounding rubble, driven by an invisible force, automatically repaired and grew. Dewey didn't know if his magic had a health bar, but at this moment, he felt overconfident. Restoring such a magnificent structure required a powerful willpower to mobilize even greater magical power. But he was like an ant trying to lift something 100, 1,000 times heavier than himself. Before he'd even halfway repaired the 1,000-foot tower, he was already exhausted, unable to continue. Just when Dewey thought he'd given up, a familiar, overwhelming force surged through him, instantly reviving his weary spirit and filling him with life. "Don't be distracted, continue," Gandalf's voice came from behind him. He had appeared behind Dewey without anyone noticing, placing a hand on his shoulder. On his finger, a ruby ring, visible only to Dewey and him, shone with a warm glow. Dewey's spirits lifted, his gaze growing more determined. A surge of magical power flowed from his wand, unleashing itself upon the tower he was repairing. The tower's repairs accelerated, and before everyone's astonished gaze, the tower's layers rose, rising skyward. Finally, a massive, 1,000-foot-tall tower rose atop We Third Up. From afar, it looked like a giant standing atop the peak, gazing out across the plains of Eriador. "Ha! The Tower of Amunsol has been reborn. What a magnificent feat of magic," Gandalf exclaimed joyfully, gazing up at the majestic tower. "Dewey, you've performed a miracle." Dewey shook his head. "Without your help, I couldn't have done it," Gandalf disagreed. "Don't be so modest, Dewey. I only helped you regain your spirits, everything else was yours. Well, enjoy your success. This tower has been reborn because of you. Have you decided on a new name for it?" Dewey hadn't originally thought of such a thing, but after hearing Gandalf's words, he had an idea. "Let's call it Hogwarts." "Hogwarts? Does it have any meaning?" Gandalf asked curiously. Dewey shook his head. "No, it just seemed right. He naturally wouldn't mention the Hogwarts story. Thus, the name of the magical school from another world was born upon this tower." Looking at the tower he had personally repaired and named Hogwarts, Dewey felt a surge of accomplishment. Initially, he had merely intended to test the limits of the restoration charm, but now, looking at the majestic tower before him, he felt it would be a good place to base himself. We Third Up is the southernmost peak of the We Third Hills, situated directly adjacent to the main east-west road. To the east, it stretches across the vast plains of Eriador, to the south, the Mosquito Marshes, and to the west, the small town of Bree and the Shire. It offers a prime location. While his attendant's duties inevitably necessitated frequent travel, having his own base provided some peace of mind. Dewey arrived at the tower entrance, bowed, and greeted everyone with a smile. "Welcome to Hogwarts. Please come in," Gandalf, respectfully, nodded to Dewey. "Gandalf, at your service," Thorin, with a serious expression, said. Thorin Oakenshield, at your service. The other dwarves also saluted. Bilbo, a bit slow to react, saw the formality of the visit and hurriedly bowed, somewhat flustered. Bilbo Baggins, at your service. The sudden formality caught Dewey off guard, and he quickly called out, "Well, come in, everyone, and explore this 1,000-year-old tower." Everyone followed Dewey inside. Constructed entirely of solid granite, the tower was sturdy and thick, with interior floors reaching 5 meters high. It contained halls, lounges, storehouses, and armories, and spiraled upwards through the walls. Although Dewey had restored the tower, everything inside had long since crumbled to ash under the erosion of time, leaving it looking empty. However, this wasn't a problem for him. Using his transfiguration magic, he conjured up tables, chairs, sofas, and beds. With Dewey's permission, everyone excitedly began to explore the tower's floors, choosing a room to sleep in for the night. Only Dewey, Gandalf, and the most serious Thorin remained in the living room. Gandalf sat on the sofa, leisurely smoking his pipe. Thorin silently studied the map of the Lonely Mountain, left to him by his father. Dewey went to the fireplace, lit it with a flame charm, and began to wave his wand, casting a spell to locate the fireplace, linking it to the fireplace at the Prancing Pony Inn in Bree. Chapter 50 Making Flue Powder. Gandalf, upon seeing this, couldn't help but ask, "Doi, are you sure? You want to make this your territory?" Thorin, standing beside him, also looked up at Doi. Powerful people in Middle-earth would establish their own strongholds or territories. Thorin was surprised that wizards as powerful as Gandalf and Doi still didn't have their own spheres of influence. Doi shook his head. "It's not really a territory, just a base where you can return and rest at any time, then be prepared. When news of the reappearance of Amunsel's tower spreads across the wasteland, many powers will turn their attention to you, some with good intentions, some with ill will. Many will also seek your protection. These are all things you will have to face," Gandalf warned Doi earnestly. Hearing Gandalf's words, Doi frowned. He hadn't expected just establishing a stronghold would cause so much trouble, and he was beginning to regret his hasty decision. But he didn't want to give up this place. So, he could only walk and observe. Bilbo and his companions finally returned from their tower tour. Panting, the dwarf collapsed onto a sofa, exclaiming, 60 floors. 60 whole floors. I'm so exhausted. Yes, climbing a building this high is more tiring than killing 60 goblins. Honestly, they should have an elevator, or they'd be exhausted after climbing all those floors, the dwarves commented. Bilbo was also panting, but seemed somewhat excited. He approached Dewey and began to talk non-stop. "Dewey, we just climbed all the way to the top. It's so high, it felt like we could touch the clouds, and we could see the road below and beyond. Oh, and we saw a huge stone platform at the top. There's a depression in the center." Benelin said that's where the Stone of Palantir is. Hearing what the dwarves and Bilbo had to say, Dewey was also amazed. This tower had 60 floors. Climbing up the stone steps one by one would be exhausting. If he really wanted to live here, he'd have to consider installing an elevator. With this in mind, Dewey consulted the dwarves. After all, back in the Blue Mountains, he'd seen the dwarves' incredibly complex elevators and pulley systems, capable of reaching 1,000 meters underground, comparable to the elevators of his previous life. The dwarves didn't disappoint Dewey, saying it was a minor problem. After his mission to the Lonely Mountain was over, they could help design and build an automatic staircase for the tower. However, Dewey had another plan, to install a fireplace on each floor and link them together to form a local flue network. This way, whenever he wanted to reach a floor, he could simply go through the fireplace. The only drawback was that it would be a bit of a flue-intensive exercise. Late at night, under a full moon, Dewey reached the 1,000-foot-high tower for the first time. It was a semi-enclosed observation tower. From there, he could gaze eastwards at the boundless lonely plains, southwards at the Mosquito Marsh and the east-west road, westwards at Chetwood Forest and the small town of Bree, and northwards at the rolling hills. The wind howled around them, and the clouds reached the tower. Looking up, the stars and the moon seemed within reach. In the center of the watchtower stood a massive stone platform with a hollow in its center, where the Stone of Truth once rested. Forged by elven craftsmen, the Stone of Truth allows its wielder to see distant objects, unobstructed by terrain or structures, and even to peer into the past. After the fall of the Nominorian Empire, Elendil brought 7 Stones of Truth with him to Middle-earth. He left 3 in Arnor and gave the other 4 to his sons, who ruled in the south, to communicate and strengthen ties. Arnor's 3 Stones of Truth were placed in 3 key locations throughout the kingdom, one of which was the Tower of Amunsel on Witherdup. After the fall of Arnor, these stones were scattered and lost. One fell into the hands of the Dark Lord Sorin and the other into the hands of the White Wizard Saruman. Through their stones, they could observe the entire Middle-earth, enabling them to determine battles from afar. If I get the chance, I'd really like to get a Crystal of Truth and study it. Dewey gazed at the empty recesses of the stone table, filled with curiosity about a Crystal of Truth known as the Palantir. After admiring the tower's summit, Dewey returned to his official duties. He unearthed a bag of moonstones and placed them on the stone table, where the moonlight bathed them. Here, the moonlight seemed even brighter, reflecting off the moonstones with an even more dazzling brilliance, illuminating the entire tower's summit. The moonstones absorbed the moonlight, becoming even brighter and more dazzling, emitting a pale blue-silver glow, as if the essence of the moonlight was condensed. At midnight, when the moon was at its peak, Dewey mixed a serpent's fang, spider silk, and moonstone in a predetermined ratio and placed them in a crucible. Using his wand, he carved runes symbolizing power and creation into the bottom of the crucible. Then, with a magical flame, he ignited the mixture, burning it continuously. Under the intense heat of the flames, the serpent's fang and spider's silk were reduced to ash, and the dazzling moonstone shattered into countless tiny particles, losing their brilliance. When the flames were almost burned, Dui extinguished the flames and used the mortar to grind the mixture of venomous snake fangs, spider silk, and moonstone into powder. Only a shiny silver-gray powder remained in the mortar. This was flue powder. Having successfully created flue powder, Dui wanted to test its properties. There happened to be a beacon tower atop the tower, which looked similar to a fireplace. Dui simply cast a spell to connect it to the fireplace below. With a wave of his hand, he lit the tower, grabbed a handful of flue powder, and sprinkled it into the flames, which instantly turned green. Gazing at the blazing flames, Dui tentatively reached out his hand, but was not burned, instead feeling a chill. Seeing this, Dui no longer hesitated and stepped into the flames. A split second later, he felt dizzy, and Dui appeared in the fireplace on the first floor. Cough cough cough, Dui squeaked, his eyes half blinded by the soot. The flue powder was quite effective, the only drawback being the excessive ash that left him covered in dust after teleportation. It seems you've successfully made flue powder. Gandalf's blue eyes twinkled, and he sat on the sofa in front of the fireplace, smiling. He seemed to have known Dewey would succeed tonight and had been waiting there specifically. Dewey pulled a bottle of flue powder from his bosom and invited him with a smile. "Gandalf, are you interested in a long journey?" Gandalf's eyes lit up at the words, and he stood up eagerly. "I can't wait." The prancing pony, the prancing pony. Two flashes of green light flashed, and the first floor living room was empty and silent. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.